And a pleasant good afternoon to all of our IB family out there. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll, the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And today, if I'm looking at my calendar correct on my phone, it's Friday, which means it is Friday free-for-all mailbag. And this is the show that's driven by you guys. So make sure you get your questions in. We will go right down the line and answer them as we go. If
We've had questions in for over an hour, Vince.
That's true. It's 11:58 is the first one.
It.
That's well played.
Love it.
But we will answer those in order. If you want to get one in right away, you can super chat it, and we'll go right then and there. But we will answer everybody's questions, or at least Brian will, because I got to go at 2 o'clock. But Brian will answer everybody's
I can't wait till your semester's over. This is horse pucky.
June 1st, my friend, June 1st.
Yep.
Believe me, I've got it.
Do you have any sick days left that you can use on Fridays? I'm just trying to figure this out.
Well, not during the season, unfortunately, because then I can't go to practice or a game or whatever. But anyway, so we are going to jump right into this thing. We're going to lead it off with a question from Facebook, I believe, Brian. And this one comes to us from Frank Anthony. He says, I'm concerned about the receiving group with all of the uncertainty. Are you concerned, and will a grad transfer help?
This is a tough one. I was asked about this question last night, and part of my concern comes down to the fact that I just don't feel that this group has been developed the way that other positions have been developed. If I had more confidence that Coach Alexander was going to do the job that I think deep down he's capable of, and he has shown at past schools, but not so much at Notre Dame, then I'm not worried about it, because you look at a situation and you say, okay, well, if they don't have Kevin Austin, well, a lot of teams around the country would say, okay, well, they've got Deion Colsey, they've got Joe Wilkins, they've got other guys they can use out there. If you say, well, they lose Avery Davis, okay, you have Lawrence Keys, you have Xavier Watts. If you lose Braden Lindsey, okay, you got Lorenzo Styles, Xavier Watts, Avery Davis, Joe Wilkins Jr., Lorenzo Styles. I mean, there's so much depth of talent here, and there's
talent, and there's a lot of talent,
and there's depth of talent, and that's the big thing for me, Vince. And so it's one of those deals where if it's not the talent that I'm worried about, it's not the players that I'm worried about, it's will they be utilized correctly? And will they be developed properly? I mean, look, if you have a couple injuries and your offensive system is still depending on young receivers to go out there and know 4 or 5 different route combinations on each play, depending on where they're lined up, then, you're not going to be successful, and they're not going to be ready to play. But if you do what every other successful team in the country does when you have young players, which is we're going to take the most talented players and figure out what they do well, and we're going to allow them to do that. And then as we continue to play them and give them experience, they're going to improve. They're going to learn more. They're going to be able to do more. And lo and behold, you're going to go be successful. And that's the big thing for me.
I feel like that's hopefully where Notre Dame is right now. I feel like with the offensive philosophy that we feel like is there,
or at least that they're starting to get to.
That they are going to get the ball into the hands of these guys, and we're going to see what they've got. And I'm confident that of the talent level, you brought up the development. That does worry me. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. That does worry me. But I feel like there's enough natural ability and enough natural talent there where that won't be the position group that we're worried about after 6 games.
Yeah, but I am still worried about it because of the fact that there's the injury history and because of the question marks about how that group has been utilized.
The injury history does worry me a little bit because, can they be successful without Kevin Austin? Yes, they can be. But are they better with Kevin Austin at full strength? Absolutely.
Same with Braden Lindsey.
Right.
Same with Braden Lindsey. Yeah.
Good point. So I mean,
and I didn't even mention Jay Brunell. Jay Brunell's a good football player. Jay Thomas is a good football player. Notre Dame's got about 9 or 10 receivers that are flat out good football players. And I believe, I'm trying to think, Xavier Watts and Jay Brunell are the only players that I believe were considered 3-star recruits. If you're someone obsessed with recruiting rankings, all of those other kids were 4-star recruits.
Yeah.
They're now juniors and seniors for the most part. Lorenzo Styles was a top 100 recruit. Deion Colsey was a top 100 recruit. What other team in the country lands a top 100 receiver and says, well, see you in a couple years, that it just doesn't happen. So that's the big key for me is if they can do a better job of developing. To Vince, to your point, I am cautiously optimistic about the changes that Coach Reese is making.
Sure.
I'm hopeful that there's a come to Jesus moment with Coach Alexander and that he kind of gets out of his own way and starts saying, you know what, I got a job to do. I'm good at this, and I'm going to go do it, and I don't care what else happens. Because then I think he'll be successful. Because, like I said, there was a reason why I was excited that Dell Alexander got hired at Notre Dame. And hopefully, if all that stuff kind of gets resolved, then I'm not concerned about this receiving core. I'm excited about it.
Yeah,
and
too.
I'm excited about it in a way that even if they have an injury or two, I'm still thinking there's enough talent there to be really effective. I mean, that's why I'm hoping that by the end of the year we're having a different conversation. I really am, because there is way too much talent for this to not be a really, really dynamic group of players. Do they have Alabama's talent? No, they don't have 4 first-round draft picks in their receiving core. But trust me, there's a lot of talent there, depth of talent. And again, we haven't even talked about the fact that they can use Michael Mayer in the pass game, those tight ends in the pass game, Kyron Williams in the pass game, Chris Tyree in the pass game. So Notre Dame will have a plethora of weapons today. And I watched Three Amigos recently, so I just needed to fit in the word plethora. And I know what the word plethora means.
I hope so. All right. So
from the movie.
I haven't seen that one in a long time, actually. But very, very solid movie. All right. Tony is leading us off here from the YouTube side of things. He says, question, in your mind, what is the most unforgivable loss of the Brian Kelly era? Mine is Michigan 2019. ND was the better team than Michigan, and they didn't even get off the bus. Totally embarrassing. He's got a follow-up. Also, that loss ultimately kept Notre Dame out of the playoff as well. And like the next 3 comments are basically all concerning this. So
Tony got to start it off with some.
Tony got to start it off. I'll put everybody's up there just so we kind of have a conversation starter. But AJ says, Tony, you stole my question. I had the same one prepared. I was going to ask, what are BK's top 3 worst losses since he's been at Notre Dame? 2019 Michigan is the worst in my opinion as well. And then continuing on from Tony's and my question, what are the 3 best or biggest wins in your opinion since he's been at Notre Dame? I would say Oklahoma 2012, Clemson 2020, and USC 2017. Boom. Okay. So with all of that, Brian, I will let you shoot first, but I kind of agree where these guys are coming from.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Miami, though, still. Look, to me, the 2019 team was not a playoff team, in my opinion. I think they might have made the playoff in 2019, but I don't know if
the same old story.
That was just not not a great team. And you say, well, they were playing really good down the stretch against bad teams. That was one of the more flawed Brian Kelly teams. And when I mean flawed relative to their ability to compete for national championship. It was still a really good football team, and they went 11-2, right? You don't go 11-2 if you're not really good. Again, my standard was that a team capable of competing for a national championship? I don't think that it was. I think that they had depth issues at running back. I think the offensive line was playing way too soft that year. They had a ton of injuries down the stretch. You lost Tommy Kramer. You lost Robert Hainsey. You lost Javon McKinley. That was a horrible coaching job in that Michigan game. But to kind of piece all those things together after that loss, and then you just played flat and uninspired against Virginia Tech. But then Ian Book who played awful the first 3 quarters, makes some huge plays down the stretch.
You and I have had many conversations about that game.
Yeah, but this is one of the things I loved about Ian Book is that he could play like garbage for 3 quarters, but if he had a shot to win it in the 4th quarter, he wasn't going to let those mistakes bother him.
Sure,
he was going to step up and make a play. He did it against LSU in 2017 too. People forget he had a huge interception in the 3rd quarter of that game that cost Notre Dame points, but he bounced back, and when they needed him to make plays in the end, he made them. And I think that sprungboard them over, and they recovered well from that loss. Past Notre Dame teams, pre-2017 Notre Dame teams, that loss to Michigan would have set off a string of another 2 or 3 losses.
Sure.
That's what I believe. And I think to be able to cobble all of that together after that embarrassing, horrible loss and go out there and win and also not only win, but win with you lost Tommy Kramer against Michigan. You lost Robert Hainsey the next week against Virginia Tech early. You're starting Josh Lugg and Trevor Rulin on the right side of your offensive line, which wasn't playing well to begin with. And you still went out there and not only won, but won convincingly. I thought that they bounced back, but that team was just not a playoff team. That team was not as good as the 2020 team. It was not even close to as good as the 2018 or even the 2017 team. I still believe that 2017 team is arguably the second best of Brian Kelly's tenure from a talent standpoint. I still think 2015 was the best. I think 2017 was the second best team. And, we've talked about, Notre Dame having big wins. When you look at Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson, they don't just beat good teams, they smash teams. That was the one year that Notre Dame wasn't just beating ranked teams, they were destroying ranked teams. I mean, they blew out Michigan State, who was a 10-win top 15 team that year. They beat them 38-18, and it wasn't that close on the road. They beat an 11-win USC team 49-14. They beat a 9-win NC State team that had 7 front 7 players get drafted 35-14. That team was giving up like under 100 yards rushing per game. Notre Dame went for over 300. I still believe that was Notre Dame's best shot of the post-2016 era to compete for a title. I felt that. But then you had the Miami debacle where they just didn't show up. You have Wimbush miss that post route to Equinemi St. Brown. I still contend that if he hits that ball, they whoop Miami. They're in the playoff because they would have beat Stanford on the road because that team had just lost its confidence by the time they got to Stanford. I think that team, and you look at 2017 too, Vince, that was a very flawed year for a lot of teams. That was a very flawed year for Alabama. That was not a great Alabama team. That was an Alabama team that put a lot of – they won with some smoke and mirrors, and that was a great coaching job by Nick Saban. If you remember that team, that was the year that they had to bench Jalen Hurts in the championship game and beat that Georgia team in overtime. That was a very beatable Alabama team that lost to Auburn 26-14 in the last game of the regular season. And I would have taken that Notre Dame offensive line against that Alabama defensive line. Again, assuming that Notre Dame was playing with the same confidence that it had pre-Miami. And that's what I'm saying. You look at Notre Dame from Michigan State up to through Wake Forest. That was the best stretch of football we've seen from Notre Dame since 1993, in my opinion. I mean, they weren't just, like I said, they weren't just winning, Vince. They were dominant. And then to just have it all come crashing down against Miami, where now people don't even really talk about how Notre Dame in November was averaging over 40 points a game through 9 games. We talk about being able to score. They rushed for over 300 yards in like 7 of their first 8 games. It was insane how dominant that team was. And then against Miami, it just all came crashing down. That to me was by far Notre Dame's worst loss because of the embarrassing nature of it.
Yeah.
You can't use the rain and the elements as an excuse in that game like you can Michigan. And that team, in my opinion, was much better than the 2019 team. So that would be mine for the biggest loss and the biggest missed opportunity, in my opinion, other than the 2015 season. Biggest wins, I think those 3 are tough to argue with.
Yeah, I agree.
I actually think Stanford was the better team that year than Oklahoma in 2012. I think Oklahoma was perceived as a tougher loss, a tougher win, a bigger win, because at the time Stanford wasn't ranked super high when Notre Dame beat them.
And that Stanford game was in the rain and that last second defensive stand, wasn't it?
Yep. And I don't believe Stanford was ranked. Stanford ended into that season with like 12 wins, and I think they finished like 7th. I'm actually looking it up now. But Stanford wasn't considered a highly ranked team at that time, and they ended up becoming much higher ranked later in the year. That, to me, was the best team Notre Dame beat that year. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Stanford was ranked 17th at the time. Notre Dame beat them. Stanford fell to 4-2. Stanford didn't lose another game the rest of the year, I don't believe. So that was a really good Stanford team. I didn't think that Oklahoma team was as good as their ranking indicated. Yeah, the rest of the year, Stanford did not lose another game the rest of the year, including they beat number 2 Oregon on the road that season in 2012. So, because remember, that was part of that late season stretch where Kansas State got beat and then Oregon got beat, and then that vaulted Alabama back into the top 2. Whereas if Oregon and Kansas State wouldn't have lost, Notre Dame would have played one of those 2 teams in the postseason. So I still think Stanford 2012 was the big win. And the other part of the 2, Vince, is I don't think they beat Oklahoma if they don't beat Stanford. If you go back and watch Notre Dame after that Stanford win, let's remember something about Stanford back then. There was not a player on the field that day that had played in a game where they beat Stanford. Not one. Because they hadn't beat Stanford since 2007. They hadn't beat Stanford since 2007. And so, you look at that team, and that was the giant. That was the dragon, right?
Yeah,
that was
right.
the team that just they didn't know how to beat. And that Stanford team was coming off some really impressive seasons. I think the year before they had finished in the top 5. 2010 they finished in the top 5. They had, remember the year before that 2012 season, they lost that epic game against Oklahoma State, I think in the Fiesta Bowl, against a really good Oklahoma State team that I thought should have played Bama or LSU for the national title that season, if you remember that. But to me, that was the team to me that 2008 was the last time they had beaten Stanford. So the guys that were fifth-year seniors in 2012 were true freshmen in 2008, the last time Notre Dame had beat them. So and none of them played, like Capper, Lewis Moore. None of those guys played in that Stanford game. So once they slayed that dragon, it was kind of like, okay, we beat Stanford, we can beat anybody. And we beat Stanford at their game. That was the other thing. Because remember the time, Stanford was a power, physical, running football team.
Multiple tackles in,
And Notre Dame beat them at their own game. And to me, that to me was the thing that sprungboard that team. If Notre Dame would have lost to Stanford, I think they'd have lost at least 2 more games that year. That was that game that said, you know what, we can beat anybody. And so I think that was, to me, that was in there the biggest 3. I think Clemson, obviously, this year was huge, and then USC in 2017. And not just because USC was really good that year, because you could argue that 2013 Michigan State, if we're just looking at how good the team was at the end of the year, in 2013, Notre Dame beat a Michigan State team that went 13-1. And the only team that beat them was Notre Dame. And, obviously they finished the 3rd that year. But at the time Notre Dame beat them, they were unranked.
Yeah.
But not only that, but the manner in which they beat USC, Vince, to me, was part of that too. Like, it's not that they just beat USC.
Well, they took
embarrassed USC. Yes.
It was in the trenches.
And that was a good USC football team. A really good USC football team. And Notre Dame just curb stomped them. From start to finish.
Yeah, from the opening, because it wasn't like their first possession. Didn't they? I think it was the first drop back. Didn't Notre Dame cause a fumble? It was like a sack fumble.
Yeah. It was Notre Dame got the ball first, punted.
Okay.
USC gets the ball, and I believe it was the first or second play. They had this blitz, and they just overwhelm USC. They strip the ball out. Tavon Coney recovers it, and then Notre Dame.
That's what it was. It was like a strip sack, and it was like game over.
And that was the story of the game because the Notre Dame defensive line just abused USC. We talk a lot about what Quentin Nelson did to Rasheem Green, and he got that no Moss moment. He's kind of turned his back on him, just let Quentin Nelson drive him off the line. And but the Notre Dame defensive line just destroyed the USC offensive line that game. And that was sort of, to me, the coming out party for Mike Elko. Because it's like, okay, they hadn't really, they hadn't really beat any name opponents up to that point in time. They hadn't really, they were playing good, but beating Michigan State, unfortunately, no matter how good Michigan State is not really a game that's going to be like, oh wow, you've arrived on a national scale.
Right.
And they played good football. They played good against Miami defensively. They didn't lose that game because of the defense. It beat Boston College, who wasn't that good. They beat Temple, Miami of Ohio, North Carolina. North Carolina stunk that year. And then you do what they did to USC, and then the next week you kind of embarrass NC State and you return a pick 6. The defense was just playing great. That was kind of like that, okay, the Brian Van Gorder era is officially dead.
Right.
And, and to me, that was the beginning of Notre Dame playing great defensive football, which they've really carried into the present time. Because even the Miami game, I didn't think the defense played terrible. The defense actually held in there for a while. The defense, the only reason the game was close for a while. Gave up 2 pick 6s and just short fields and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was.
Game was horrible.
But that USC game was impressive. 1, it was USC. 2, it was an 11-1 team. And 3, it was just a dismantling.
Mm-hmm. All right, so a lot of people chimed in. Jeffrey says the Michigan game took 10 years off my life. John, the Michigan loss was horrible. The Miami game ruined the season 2. Thanks for bringing up the Miami game. I had erased it from memory. The horror. Let's see here. Getting through. We've got some trivia in there for TV, which is awesome. I love this group. Okay, here we go. DJ, if you could choose one, what position group can Notre Dame least afford a fall camp injury? I'm going to say safety. And I read this question before, and I was going through my head trying to come up with a different answer just to be different. and I can't logically put together an argument. Now you could say maybe one of the offensive linemen because of experience and things of that nature, but the depth at the safety position right now is so thin that it's got to be safety. If Houston Griffith or God forbid Kyle Hamilton go down, I think I have to agree. I think that would be the biggest hurdle to overcome for this team.
Yeah, I've got nothing else to add. That would be the position where it'd be the most devastating.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody said center. Trying to find that one that center might be.
No, because I think then you could just move Jarrett Patterson back to center.
Good point. Yeah, yep. Very good call.
I mean, if we're being honest, Notre Dame's best center this year is Jarrett Patterson. You're not moving him necessarily because Zeke Correll is better than him at center. You're moving him because Zeke Correll is one of your 5 best linemen, and Zeke Correll can play center, and Jarrett Patterson could literally play all 5 positions.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think Jarrett Patterson's still right now their best center. So, and then if you had to move him, you could either slide Rocco Spindler into the starting lineup. If he's not starting, if he is starting, you could then move Andrew Christopher or Quinn Carroll. So I think they're in better position to handle an interior loss than they are a tackle loss, in my opinion. I think if they lose somebody at tackle, there's a little bit of a bigger concern right now. But I think for me, Vince, if we're past safety, I think the biggest concern is at running back, in my opinion. If you lose one of the top 2 running backs, I think that there's a big drop off because Sebo's a good football player, but you're not using Sebo the same way you do those other guys. Right. Sebo is a runner.
Do you think that they would just play more of whoever was left between Chris Tyree and Kyron Williams?
Well, yeah, but still that takes away from what you're able to do. And then you ask the question is, when does that injury happen? If the injury happens early in the year, then that guy's going to wear down. But part of the excitement that you and I have, and I think a lot of people have about the running back position, is not just that those guys are both very talented, but it's the fact that they're very talented in the manner in which you're going to use them together.
Sure.
And then you lose that, it takes away a weapon. And now one of the things we talked about, right? Like, well, if you lose a receiver, you're still okay because you got the tight ends, you got the running backs. Well, what if you lose a running back? Then you lose a receiver. I think that could have a greater impact on other positions as well. Makes
sense to me. DJ, remember to hit that like button. Always helps these guys out. And yes, we would appreciate that. Like, subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you're subscribed there too, so you get all the updated info. Let's see here. The
interesting one, Vince, while you're looking too about the
injury question
is Michael Mayer is an interesting one because you look and say, well, if you lose Michael Mayer tight end, you still have very, very good tight ends, and that's very true. But with all due respect to the other tight ends, who I think are good football players, Michael Mayer is arguably the best tight end in the country. And I think anytime you lose a guy that's that good,
even though there's other guys,
unless you're replacing him with someone that good, I think that is, to me, would be a tough one.
That's a good point. Notre Dame 2164. Okay, I got to ask, if we had adopted the new offensive philosophy that we are implementing today after we lost the national championship game in 2012, do you think we win it all in 18 or 20? It's a good hypothetical. I mean, it's I would say that the offense has a better chance to compete if they had adjusted the offensive philosophy earlier. Whether they win or not is
I still think that Clemson game would have been a tough win for them. Yeah. I think they could have beat Clemson, but I'm not going to say definitively, yes, they definitely beat Clemson in 2018. That was a really good Clemson team. And 2020, I don't think so because look, the whole thing about playing Bama this year is if Notre Dame had the correct offensive philosophy, and again, if we're just talking with the personnel they had, I still don't think they beat Bama. Your and I's contention was that it's going to be a competitive game, and then maybe if you can catch a break or two, you can win the game. But it wasn't a game where I thought Notre Dame was going to win per se, unless Bama made a bunch of mistakes. It was a game that I thought that they should have been competitive in.
Yeah.
I think that, to me, the only question that I would have is, there were other things that happened that beyond just the offensive system that to me kept this team from winning that I don't think the change in offensive philosophy would have negated, mainly being 2 hires, in my opinion. Number 1, Brian McGorder is defensive coordinator. Number 2, Mike Sanford is the offensive co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. I think Mike Sanford basically did such a bad job coaching Brandon Wimbush that by the time Chip Long and Tommy Rees took over, Brandon Wimbush was damaged goods mechanically. And I think he was beyond fixing at that point in time. So, I look at it and say those two hires to me would have still been damaging. Now, if you were to tell me that they would not have made the Mike Sanford hire and still made the offensive philosophy change, and we would have seen a Brandon Wimbush in 2017 that was much closer to the Brandon Wimbush we saw in high school. And I've had coaches that weren't part of recruiting Brandon Wimbush tell me that they didn't recognize him. When they watched film and then came to Notre Dame and saw him throw, they're like, who the heck is that kid? He had been so jacked up by Mike Sanford. And so I think that's something that if you didn't make that hire and then you're running that offensive philosophy, a more of an open attack, and you have Brandon Wimbush with what he can do running the ball, and in a Brandon Wimbush looking like he did that made him a top 50 player in the country coming out of high school, that 2017 team might have been special. And then Brandon Wimbush is still your quarterback in 2018.
Right.
And he's confident. So then maybe you'd have had a shot to beat Clemson, but not the way that Brandon Wimbush was playing. And so that's why I would say no to that question. But I think they would have been more competitive. And then that asks the question of, if you're more competitive in those games, do you then get some better recruits that allow you to be more competitive in 2020? But it's just such a, this dominoes that would have to happen. Yeah. It's just hard to really dive into that and really say it.
Let me ask you a coaching question, because I know you've coached quarterbacks before. Let's say you get a guy like Brandon Wimbush who, has positioned himself, or Phil Dracovic, or you insert name here, right? Who's had a storied high school career, maybe doesn't have the classic throwing style, but he's obviously been successful in high school. It made him a high recruit. It made him want you in your room. Do you tinker with the throwing style, or you just let him be him and teach him the philosophy of the game, how to read defenses, things of that nature? What kind of coaching strategy do you take on that?
The only time I alter a player's throwing motion is if it creates problems. I've talked about 2023 recruits Ricky Collins. He's got a motion that I would like to speed up. He's got that long Trevor Lawrence, drop the ball down here thing, which, it is what it is. If you're going to have that, there's other things you need to do to compensate. I don't want to change it, but I'd like to speed it up a little bit, something like that. Because Trevor Lawrence does that, but he's really fast getting through the throwing zone. I'm a big believer that unless the throwing motion creates problems, so if it creates inconsistency, inaccuracy, problems like that, then you tinker with it. Otherwise, I don't mess with it. I'm a big believer that you mess with a quarterback's feet and you mess with his mind. That's what you focus on. When Phil Dracovic, there was nothing wrong with his high school throwing motion. With Phil, it was, you needed to teach him to maybe throw in rhythm a little bit more effectively. He was so good outside the pocket and off platform. We saw that at BC this past year. We saw that with Brandon Wimbush. To where with Brandon, it was kind of like his footwork would get him in trouble. His ability to process reads would get him into trouble. Phil has to learn to even as good as he was at BC this year, he was making plays off God-given ability. There's still a lot he has to improve upon when it comes to reading defenses, processing information, getting the ball out with better timing, things like that. Those are the things that I focus on as a coach. I'm not a big fan of tinkering with throwing motions. Steve Spurrier used to do that. Every quarterback had to throw the exact same way. And, that worked when he had quarterbacks that naturally fit, Danny Warfel. But I don't believe you can be successful with that. I think you have to let a kid be kind of who he is. And because you're spending a whole lot of time trying to change his muscle memory. And I just don't think that's necessary. I don't think there's one way to throw a football mechanically with your arm. I think the key, however, is the feet have to be where I don't say that there's not one way to do it, but that's where most quarterbacks, in my opinion, get in trouble, is their feet and then their ability to process information, the anticipation, the timing of when to throw and where to throw. Work on those things, and the other part will be fine. Because if you go back and watch Brandon Wimbush, a lot of his problems, he had just no confidence in his throwing motion even by 2017 when he was a starter. He had no confidence in his throwing motion. And then you go back and watch him as a junior and senior in high school, and he didn't have those problems. And his mechanics had changed. But a big part of his mechanical problems was his footwork were a mess. And Vince, you and I used to watch the drills that Mike Sanford did with them in practice. You're like, what in the heck are they doing? That has nothing to do with football. That's like something he saw at some coaches clinic and was like, "Ooh, that's cool. Let's try that." And there's no application to football. And that was one of the many problems that I had with that situation. But no, does that answer your question, Vince?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
I was
marking
just
the feet
curious.
in the head. Yeah.
You basically said exactly what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like, tinkering with a guy's swing, because that hits home with me right now.
Mm-hmm.
Guys can have a funky swing, but if it gets through the zone the right way, okay. I mean, there's a lot of different guys in the Hall of Fame who have really good batting averages, and none of them have the same swing. So
Right.
it's similar to that, in my opinion.
Same with pitching. I mean,
Yeah,
there's guys
right.
pitch differently. You have to find
Exactly.
especially with your arm,
Right.
You have to find what's most comfortable for that player's body and is the most repeatable thing, and allows him to be the most effective and accurate. And
Yep.
I just think too many people get obsessed with the throwing motion, and especially people that don't know quarterbacks. And now there's all these thousands of quarterback coaches across the country, and it's like, well, why are they all tinkering with kids' throwing motions? Because what are you going to do if a kid comes to me and says, hey, there's nothing wrong with your throwing motion, maybe we can do some footwork stuff. He's not going to then pay you hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars to coach him up. You have to say, well, I mess with this and I tinker with this. And that's what I say, no, that's nuts. I mean, and that's the thing, like Tyler Buckner, like, were they just bored? Is that why they started to mess with his throwing motion? Somebody convinced them that there was an issue there that didn't really exist because they needed the money. They needed him to pay him. I don't know what the reason is, but I still don't understand why he changed his motion. I feel the same way about Phil Dracovic. I feel the same way about Brandon Wimbush. I mean, it's just over and over and over again. And, that's why I say you keep the throwing motion as long as it gets the job done. I don't care about the throwing motion. Work on the feet, work on the core, work on the mind.
Yep. Could not agree more. All right. John has a bet with his friend. He goes, a buddy and I have made the same bet over the last 10 to 15 years. What will be the first offensive play of the season? Now, I'm assuming he means run or pass. Like, what is it? Not specifically, is it going to be a flood route or is it,
I think he means specifically.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, what?
Like
otherwise
zone read? Or
yeah. And otherwise, it's like you got a 50-50 shot at getting it right.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of, I mean, what do you think the first play is going to be?
I think Jack Cohn's going to bang a deep post. That's what I think. Bring it on, baby.
Write it down. Vince D'Addario.
That's what I would say. Either a deep post or a deep corner route. I mean, let's open this thing up. Play action. Here we go. That's what I would do.
I think they're going to run an outside zone with an RPO attached. Okay. So I'm not saying
butter, baby.
Yeah, I'm not saying run or pass. I'm saying they're going to run outside zone with an RPO attached. Now that could be a handoff, it could be a pull and throw.
Yeah.
It just depends on what Florida State's going to do. But I'm going with outside zone with an RPO attached. And maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But
yeah, right. Good point.
And I think they're going to run it right at Blake Fisher, depending on, assuming obviously you got to get the where the ball is on the hash. But I just think they're going to come out and try to make a statement on snap one.
All right.
I would like your I would like your pick better.
Well,
just come out and have Cohn bang a post route on snap one.
That's just me. D-Rock Irish question: is there a deadline for the upcoming season for an athlete to submit his name into the transfer portal? I assume he means and still be able to play that season.
I believe it's first day of the semester. Once the semester starts,
right? That makes sense.
When.
Once
I believe
starts.
I could be wrong on this, but I believe that if you transfer in fall camp, especially now that the rule is that there's no sit-out period, that as long as the semester hasn't started at the school you're at or the school you're transferring to, there's no.
Well, thank goodness there's a rule, so there's no trade deadline basically in the middle of the season.
But honestly, what I'm curious about, Vince, is I don't know. I don't know how this rule is going to, like, if a kid leaves in the 5th game of the year and wants to transfer somewhere, like, there's no sit-out rule. I don't know how these are going to
mid-season.
But I don't think that you're going to be able to. I still think you'd have to sit out that season.
Can you imagine if there was like mid-season and like some kid is just having a studly year, like a MAC school or something, and Alabama comes calling, like, hey, you're the missing link between us and a national title.
Well, there's a lot of people in the media that would say, well, it's his right. It's his freedom. Oh, my God. Stupid.
Anyway, let that one go. All right, Jay. Tom Loy reported Ohio State is surging for Carnell Tate. Staff better hit this visit out of the park whenever he comes in June. I would hate to lose another top wide receiver. Notre Dame should have landed from the Chicago area.
Yeah, that would be bad, but I think we need to pump the brakes on reports of who is or isn't surging. I don't want to. I mean, Tom's my guy. I don't want to get into that, and I'm not. I don't know what Tom did or didn't say or how he said it, but these kids haven't even taken visits yet. Let's just
right, and they're going to. And I think a lot of these kids, now that they know that there's a visit coming,
right,
they're gonna be taking them, and there's a lot of things schools can do on those visits to, influence.
I mean, there's just not a lot to talk about right now. So
sure,
Yeah.
Anyway. Got to get something going. I hear you. Yeah. All right. BRBR. Okay. Lots of letters there. In an era of turnover chains and similar stuff, the use of pump fakes more valuable than ever. Glory-seeking corners are jumping routes like slants more than ever. Need more sluggos with a pump fake. Those are all well and good if you've got an offensive line that can hold off the pass rush. I would say that because that a sluggo with a pump fake takes time, and some of these offensive lines out there don't have time to make that happen. I would say. Are you noticing when you watch film that glory-seeking corners are jumping slant routes and things more often? Is that like a thing
I
you're
mean,
noticing?
it depends on the league. I mean, there's leagues where you see that's part of the reason that Oklahoma gets guys wide open so much is because they run these like double moves. They run like don't now sluggos, for those who don't know it, that's a slant and go. So you fake a slant and go. But they run double moves. They'll run like options, like a stick and go, nod and go, like a 6-yard option, and then the guy bites and then you beat him. Even deeper options and you beat him. They won wheel routes, snap and fades, and those. I mean, they run all types of double moves, and I think those things are effective. And especially nowadays, Vince, as more and more people are playing more man coverage, you're seeing even more of it. Because guys are trying to make plays on the ball. So I don't know if. I don't know if it's necessarily more than in the past. I think it's just when you play man, that's just the nature of playing man. Teams that play a lot of cover 2 get real aggressive with their corners too. If you're aggressive with your corners, you're not going to see a lot of guys playing cover 4, jumping routes, getting beat with sluggos. You know what I mean? Just because it's the nature of the coverage is like, if you run a slant route, you're not my guy anyway, so I'm not going to worry about it. So, but in this era of a lot more cover 2, a lot more in cover 2, meaning that's part of a split field coverage. They may be 4 on one side, 2 on the other. In this era of a lot more man, you're seeing guys jump, and also because it is an era where there's so much quick game and screens and things like that. I do think there's a lot of that, and I think that's something and that's why I've advocated in the past, Vince. That's why I want to see more like post snap switching by Notre Dame, just doing more things to create miscommunications or mistakes by the defense. I think those things are effective tools in regards to that.
All right. Shane, Tom Loy has a crystal ball in for 23 tight end Mac Markway. What are your thoughts on him? And looks to have an impressive offer list already.
I wouldn't take him. Look, Mac Markway is a good football player. He's from St. Louis. He goes to DeSmet. My problem with him is he's a good football player. I don't think he's better than what you have. I think that he is a throwback tight end. He's kind of a Brock Wright type of high school recruit, which again, that's really good. But to me, I don't think that's the ideal tight end to thrive at Notre Dame. When you talk about the fact that you signed 2 in 2021 and you signed 2 in 2020 and you signed 2 in 2019, the tight end they need to bring needs to be an elite player. I like Jackson Howard a lot better than Mac Markway. I like Deuce Robinson a lot better than Mac Markway. And again, we have to understand what crystal balls are about. They're not always predictions of what will happen. It's sort of this is the trend that I see sometimes. Sometimes it's a prediction, but when a guy is a long way away from committing, it's more about trying to get your pick in early of where you're predicting, because the earlier you get your pick, and this isn't a shot at Tom at all. Tom's my dude. Like, I like Tom, Vince, you know that.
Oh yeah.
This is more of just this. He's working within a framework created by the company he works for.
Sure.
You get more points by getting a pick in early. So if you get a pick in early and Notre Dame continues trending with him over the next year and your prediction comes right, you get huge points because you got that thing in early. Now, if the kid goes and visits Ohio State and Ohio State seems to be trending, then you can change your pick. So we just, if you could go back and track crystal balls, and this is just true in general, you're going to see guys get multiple crystal ball predictions to different schools, the same analyst. Sure. Because it's as much as a trending as it is a prediction. It's a prediction when the kid's going to commit.
Right.
So if so-and-so is going to commit after his visit and then 25 crystal balls go in for that kid to go to a school, then, the word has gotten out and that's where he's going to go, right? Well, it's true. Like guys, I know. BYU are making predictions about a Notre Dame kid. Like why? But that's just kind of how that works, and that's one of the issues I have with it. And it's not an issue with the dudes doing it. They're doing what they're told to do by the people by the company. So I wouldn't get too much into that right now, but that would disappoint me if they took Mac Markway. And again, he's a good football player, but that's just not the kind of tight end that thrives in college. And it's not the kind of tight end that Notre Dame should be getting. And they should not be taking a guy like that this early. I hope we don't have another Jack Nickel situation. Although Mac Markway is a better football player than Jack Nickel. But I'm putting all my chips in the table for Jackson Howard and Deuce Robinson right now at this point in time.
All right. Liam actually has a really good question because I think this is something that a lot of people wonder. What's the difference between an analyst and an assistant coach? And more importantly, what is their restriction on interaction with players during the offseason? Can they help drill in route running and O-line techniques?
Analysts are not allowed to do on-field work.
Correct.
That's basically the deal.
Yep.
How you use analysts is going to vary, and teams that have a lot more analysts will use analysts in different ways. Some people use analysts to do self-scouting. I would have an analyst that did self-scouting. Absolutely. I would have an analyst that did future opponent scouting. In today's era of the transfer portal, I would hire 4 or 5 assistants that are analysts that are responsible for basically scouting different parts of the country, almost like an NFL player development type of system.
Yep.
Because when 1,000 kids hit the transfer portal, I need to know who I'm talking to find out if this is a kid that we should go after. And so I think that Notre Dame's analyst situation needs to be expanded, and they have expanded it quite a bit. I prefer hiring veteran coaches in those jobs, like a Kerry Cooks. I think hiring Kerry Cooks as an analyst, if they can continue to keep him there, is a phenomenal move by Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So I think you need analysts that are very experienced at breaking down film, studying opponents, figuring out tendencies, and those type of things. So that way, when I finish my, if I'm the offensive coordinator, if I'm Tommy Rees, and I finish our Sunday grades of the game we just played, and we're getting ready to start breaking down the next opponent, I want printouts, I want tendencies, I want third down charts, I want first down charts, I want red zone charts, I want short yardage goal line charts. I want all that stuff done. Now, I'm still going to watch the film and study it, of course, but I want you to do a lot of the analytical work going into it. This is their 5 best players. Now, I may disagree with that. I may watch the film and say, you know what, I'm more worried about that guy. But we've got so much of that foundation done. Whereas, Vince, in high school, when I was coaching Division III, we couldn't really start that stuff till Sunday. So, all day Sunday's kind of getting caught up on the upcoming opponent.
Yep.
And whereas now it's like, okay, here it is. Now we're ready to rock and roll. Sure. And I'd have to do that stuff. We didn't have GAs and analysts and stuff like that. So, I think that's what analysts do. Now, are there schools that use analysts to coach when there aren't media around or compliance people around? I'm sure. But off the field, they're allowed to have interactions, is my understanding. They're not barred from being around the players. They just can't give on-field instruction during practices.
I will say this. When Jeff Quinn was an analyst at Notre Dame, because that's what he was doing before he became the offensive line coach, I was on the sidelines participating in one of my other jobs, and he and I had like a 20-minute conversation just chatting, but it was during practice. He was out there. With the guys, he was talking to them when they would come over, and get a drink or whatever, but he wasn't on the field coaching.
And he can't instruct them. Right.
Exactly. He was just
saying, hey, get water over there is not instructing play.
Exactly. He was shooting the bull, hey, nice play. Well, whatever. It was just, but he was out there and he was a part of the group. But he was on the sidelines, with me. And just kind of doing his thing. So
he's a good dude. He's a fun guy to talk ball with. Jeff's Coach Quinn's an interesting cat, but he's a good dude.
I had a great conversation.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
I thought he was awesome.
He walked up to me one time. I was in the Goog, kind of waiting on a press conference was over. Maybe we were waiting on one, but I'd gotten there early. And I'm doing some evaluation stuff and some breakdown stuff. And he comes over, and I didn't realize he was standing over my shoulder for like a couple minutes watching what I was doing. And so he's like, "What you doing?" And he's just a real good guy. You know what I mean? Like he's a good dude. Like he's a dude you like to go to the Texas Roadhouse with, or something like that. Just sit in the back corner, just like take a notepad and you're just talking ball and drawing up plays and how would you block this, and and sharing stories about the because he coached D2 back in the 90s and 2000s, right? So he understands what life is like at those schools where you get no financial support. You've got like 5 full-time assistants and then a bunch of volunteers, your quarterback's coach teaches at the local high school or is the mailman or something like that. It's a whole different animal at that level. You can have some fun war stories with him. Yeah,
no doubt about it. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. So I just – that was just an example of what kind of analysts are doing at practice. They're just kind of out there. Some of them don't go out there. But anyway, Ryan, under Marcus Freeman at Cincinnati, they had 49 interceptions since 2017 when he took over, 16 total interceptions being the highest in back-to-back years. With overall better talent at Notre Dame, can we finally get a season with 10-plus picks?
They've had seasons. They've had a lot of seasons. Are you talking about just from the secondary? Because this last year, Notre Dame had 10 plus interceptions in 2018. They had 12. 2017, they had 10. I guess they didn't have as many. 2014, they had 16. 13 the year before. I was thinking in 2019 they had a lot more interceptions, but they had a ton of fumbles. They forced a lot of fumbles that year because they were one of the top teams in the country in 2019 in forcing turnovers. But look, to me, I think a big part of that interception is goes back, Brian, to what we talked about before, which is it leads to that question about the sluggos and such. They're getting a lot of picks because they're very aggressive in coverage. They jump routes. They play a lot of man. There's a lot more contested throws. There's, getting your hands on a lot more throws, things like that. And I think those things lead to interceptions. But the other part of it, too, is you're not going to be great at forcing a lot of interceptions and turnovers if you aren't getting after the quarterback.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing for me, that when I look at this defense and I say, I expect them to be more involved and active. Right. But it's for me, it's going to be about, are you getting your hands on a lot of passes? And that's going to be a big thing for me. And when you watch Cincinnati over the years, they've done that. The interesting thing about Notre Dame is, though, Vince, Notre Dame in recent seasons has gotten a lot of pass breakups. They just don't make a lot of interceptions. Last year, Notre Dame ranked 5th in the nation in pass breakups. They only had 7 interceptions.
Yeah.
So it is kind of interesting, and you wonder about kind of why part of that is. It's a little strange. But in other years, Notre Dame didn't get as many pass breakups. But I think it's the nature of the coverage, playing more man. I think having a safety in the middle of the field can help with some of that too. I think having linebackers that are really effective in coverage is a big part of that too.
Sure.
I think that's another big thing. And when you look at Cincinnati last year, they had 4 interceptions from their linebackers. Well, their Rover had 2. Darian Beavers was their will linebacker, had a couple. They had 16 in only 10 games. But to me, that's the big thing for me, is just you getting your linebackers more involved in coverage should help with that as well.
Interesting one here from Connor. I will defer to you on this one.
I haven't seen that.
Okay, I have not seen it either, so I guess that's something I'm going to have to look up. So I'm going to write that down.
Yeah.
Because I have not seen it, so I guess I'm going to have homework.
The Missouri quarterback is the one being mocked by Texas players, or the Missouri quarterback is mocking Texas players?
I think it looks like Texas is mocking him.
Gotcha. I'm sorry. Texas shouldn't be mocking anyone at this point in time. But I don't know what this one is. I don't know what that's about. So
are you looking it up right now? Are you cheating?
Yeah. I don't see anything. So hey, Connor, if there's like a link or something,
throw the
like
link
that,
in the chat.
Can you do that? Because I'll look at it during the show, but I don't have a clue what you're talking about.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't.
Connor's the first person ever stumped me on a question.
Wow. Hey.
So I did say you can ask anything related to college football. But
he said it's a free for all Friday. So here we go.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's good.
Michael, and we'll come back to that one if we find it. But Michael says, hey, Brian and Vince, TGIF, with what you know, which of the 23 prospects have you spoken with that you feel is destined to commit to Notre Dame that could be a leader of the class like Fisher was? I assume leader as in ability or leader as in, from a vocal
I think he's
standpoint?
talking about leadership from like a getting kids in the class.
Okay,
that's what
he was both.
Fisher was great at. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really early. It's really early for me for that. I mean, obviously, if they can quarterback in the class, that would help. I keep getting asked about 23, and I'm like, look, we're not even halfway done with the 2022 class yet. We haven't even had official visits yet for the 2022 class. Can we do that first?
Like sophomores, man. That's
but I think Carnell Tate could be one of those guys, and that's why he's an important recruit since he was asked about early, because he's an Illinois kid, but he's also an IMG. He's going to have some of that IMG persona. But I mean, to me, it's going to be whoever they get at quarterback, and that's why I'm hoping that they can identify a quarterback somewhat soon.
Yeah.
And be able to go get them, whether it's Dante Moore, whether it's Ricky Collins, whether it's somebody like that. I mean, I think quarterbacks are natural leaders. The other part of it too, Vince, is some of the better leaders are guys that are somewhat local. And I think there's a need. There's kind of a need for that. I think it's nice to have a local kid that can be a quote unquote leader of your class, because the local kids are at a lot of the games.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of that too. So whenever there's visits, is that kid on campus? Is he going to be around? Because there's only so much that you can do when you start looking around and saying, hey, come visit campus, be around me. And that's the thing that's interesting so far about this class is there's not a ton of local players that right now Notre Dame's super high on, with one exception, and that'd be Drake Bowen. I think he's a guy, to me, that could be a leader of the class because he's local, he's highly ranked, he seems to be pretty social media active. He seems to tweet a lot on social media and stuff like that. Seems like he has a little bit of swagger to him. So
sure.
I think that would be a guy that I would look at and say, if they're able to get him in the class early, that could be one that moves it. And then after that, you start looking at other players and who could have regional impacts. If Notre Dame's able to get Keon Keeley from down in Florida, from Berkeley Prep, if they're able to get him in the class early, I think he's going to be a relatively highly ranked player. He's really impressive. Brian Smith sent me some videos of his spring jamboree game, and boy, that kid's gotten better as he heads into his junior season. So that's the best I can do for you. But I'm just not as fully locked in on 2023
sure.
yet, because it's most of those kids have never been on Notre Dame's campus.
Right.
So until they do,
huge.
We're not going to really know truly where they stand with Notre Dame.
John has more of a comment, but he says Notre Dame needs to get back to smashing teams in order to get the backups into quality snaps. Development has to happen for the 22 season to be a success. I agree that development needs to happen for 22, because the 22 schedule is way harder than the 21 schedule. But I think that development needs to happen regardless of whether they're getting guys in for mop-up duty. I want rotational. I want them to develop guys as part of their game plan anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see more bodies in, because I think the depth chart at a lot of these positions warrants that some of those guys see the field. And I don't know and I'm not banging John in any way. But when you're smoking a team and you get a guy in for mop-up duty, I don't know that really develops a kid. Yeah, it gets him in front of 80,000.
I think it does if they're, and this is just from my experience, I think it does if it's a situation where you're letting them run the offense. That's the difference.
Very good. I appreciate the clarification, because when I think of mop-up duty, it's you're running the same 5 plays over again. They're all run play. It's just basic. Let's not screw this up and keep the clock moving.
And I think that's also partly about the position. I think there's some positions where, an offensive lineman's going to get something out of just coming out.
True.
I mean, I think it's quarterbacks and receivers. But, I mean, I think but see, the other thing, too, is when you're smashing teams, you can start getting guys in the third quarter. You don't necessarily do a mass substitution.
Right.
But, let's just say Lorenzo Styles is they like him, but there's just a couple areas where we're not like in Notre Dame, like don't play him till he masters the whole offense, but just normal teams. Say, he's close, but we're just not sure of a couple things. And then so you're beating Florida State pretty convincingly, or you're beating Purdue pretty convincingly. So you know what you do is you don't wait till the fourth quarter when you're just going to hand the ball off. You get Lorenzo in early third quarter. You go over halftime with him. Hey, Lorenzo, here's some things we want to see you do.
Yes.
And then you get him out in the third quarter with your first team offense and get him some work that way. I think those are things you can only really do when you're, to John's point, when you're smashing somebody. Like the Notre Dame USC game was over at halftime in 2017. I mean, that was a big one. They didn't really start steamrolling Michigan State till the third quarter. Because if you remember that game, USC was about to score a touchdown to make it a 7-point game. Remember that. Notre Dame was up 21-7. I can't remember who the running back was, but the running back gets to the goal line. Sean Crawford rips the ball out. Notre Dame recovers, goes down and scores to make it 28-7 late in the second quarter. So that game was competitive at least through the half. And then in the third quarter, Notre Dame really, really took it away. But, the USC game, that was a beatdown. That was the game you could have started getting some guys in the third quarter. And those are the games, to John's point, those are the games where I want to start seeing.
Yes.
Let's say Rocco Spindler's not starting. You're up on Toledo by 3 or 4 touchdowns. You want to put him in at halftime or put him in late in the second quarter? Go for it.
Put him in with everybody else.
But you're not going to do that.
Second
but you're not going to do that when it's a 17-14 game against Wisconsin,
unless he's in a predetermined rotation.
Right. But that's not development. He's already there.
Good point. Let's see here. Mark Stallman has a question about Marcus Freeman. Will he be a one and done if successful this year? What would it do to the program? I think we've talked about this as well. We are kind of under the assumption that it's a 2-year deal minimum, right? I mean, and I don't know if you're hearing that officially or if that's what you're hoping for.
Well, there's nothing official. There's unfortunately, and this is something I wish would change in contracts. I wish that colleges would make contracts. I wish that was, again, if we're going to bang on kids for leaving, then I wish that we would make contracts where it's a little bit more painful to just get out of a contract by a certain time.
Sure.
If you're in a 5-year contract and you get through 3 years, okay, fine. But if you've signed a 4-year contract, you can't leave after year 1 unless it's going to cost that other school a big chunk of change or something like that. But I mean, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But so it's not official, but it's just more of just like, hey, I'm committing to this, is what I was told.
Sure.
And honestly, I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to leave Notre Dame for a job, with all due respect to Clark Lee, Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt was a unique situation for Clark Lee because it was his alma mater. Right. I don't see him leaving for like Virginia Tech. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Number one, he could have a shot to have this job in a couple years.
Sure.
Why would you leave for like Virginia Tech or a job like that? And the only big job that I could see opening up as of right now that might be attractive is a job for a school that he spent much of his life not even being willing to say the name of the state, and that's Michigan. I don't see an Ohio State grad that grew up in Ohio taking the Michigan job. Especially when the Notre Dame job could be there for him.
Yeah,
in a couple of years. So
I don't see that either.
I just don't see him leaving after this year. And what it would do for the program is it would make Notre Dame even more attractive for big time assistant coaches. That's what it would do. It would say, you know what, you can go to Notre Dame, and if you have success as a young coordinator,
a head coach,
you're going to get a big time head coaching job. And I think the other part of it is, I would imagine. So I think Marcus Freeman getting hired is also a great thing for Mike Mickens. Because I think it's a defense that Mike Mickens knows. They coached together for years at Cincinnati, for multiple years at Cincinnati. They know each other. I think that Mike Mickens is kind of I don't know if he's being groomed officially, but I think it's kind of like, I'm seeing him being groomed, whether it's official or unofficial, to sort of be Marcus Freeman's Clark Lee to Mike Elko.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Whether it's Marcus Freeman becomes the head coach at Notre Dame or Marcus Freeman goes somewhere else, then Mike Mickens slides right into that job because he'll have been at Notre Dame then for a couple of years, had some success, and then he'll now be a guy that to me could just continue doing what with this defense what Clark Lee did when Mike Elko left after a year, because that's the panic that people have. Oh my gosh, Mike Elko's leaving after 1 year. What did it do to the program then? Nothing. They got better because he had laid a great foundation. One of his assistants who knew the offense, who'd coached with him in the past, took over, who'd never been a D coordinator. That worked out pretty well. And I think Mike Mickens would be able to do the same thing, in my opinion. So I think and to Mark's point, I think it would make the more you can start producing big-time coaches into Power 5 jobs, the more attractive your school becomes when you want to make that next hire.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. The time is nigh. It is 2:00. And so I am going to.
You got to stay around for this next question, Vince, even if you're just watching.
All right.
So Allison T says, new around here, love the show. In retrospect, how did you see recent Notre Dame stars, say JOK, Book, and Eichenberg coming out of high school?
Very interested to hear this.
How would you hear how they compare? So I'm going to show you. I have found the article that I wrote after signing day about Ian Book.
I'm going to back out, but I'm going to keep watching. You'll see me in the corner.
This is what I wrote. This is what I wrote about Ian Book in 2016. So let's see if you can see it. All right. I'm going to try to make that bigger. So here's what I said. And I want you to focus on this part right here. So I said, in fact, he compares more favorably to former Irish quarterback Tommy Rees, getting by more on moxie, intelligence, and attitude than raw tools. Unlike Rees, Book is a quality athlete that projects to possess the ability to extend plays at the next level. His arm is good enough to make most throws, and he can move the chains with the read option. He is not a player that is going to put a team on his shoulders due to his physical tools. What he is, however, is a player that in time has enough physical skills, which he combines with impressive between the ears and in the chest traits to lead a team. If surrounded with enough talent, and Notre Dame will surround its quarterback with outstanding talent in the next few years, he could prove to be a winner. I think I pretty much nailed that one. Don't you think? So now the number one guy in the class for me that year, however, was in 2016 was Liam Eichenberg. I thought Liam Eichenberg was a star. If people knew me from Rivals, I used to bang Rivals all the time because they had him as a 3-star until the very end. He was my number one player in the class. I had Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah as a 4-star player with a 4.5-star upside. I think he even outplayed what I thought he could be. I thought he was going to be a really good player. He even outplayed what I thought he could be. He was a guy that I thought would need time to develop because of his size, and he was young. He showed up at Notre Dame at 17. He didn't turn 18 until the end of his freshman year at Notre Dame. And so I thought he needed time to develop, and that's what he did. So I mean, look, I've had plenty of misses. I had Javon McKinley as my number 2 player in that 2016 class. That was a miss. He did not pan out to be the player that I thought he would be. But I think there's been a lot that I've gotten right, and I think the 3 that you brought up, Allison, I nailed, in my opinion. So I think I got those. I think I got those pretty right. So yeah, I'm patting myself a little bit on the back on that one. But when you said that, I started looking it up because I remember saying good things about Ian Book, and I didn't think he'd be like a great player, but I thought he could be a winner if you put enough talent around him, and it's exactly what happened. All right. See, IUP Jess 2001 with talk of offensive changes and some previous reluctance to adopt them. What do you believe Coach Kelly's preferred offensive philosophy is, and what would he run if he had no limitations? So I wrote an article back in February, and this is a great question. And I said the thing that Brian Kelly needs to do if he wants to get over that final hump, and again, we should all be able to agree that Brian Kelly has brought this program out a long way in 11 seasons. One of the things that I think that has kept him from getting over the top and climbing to the top of the mountain, whatever, closing the gap, whatever phrase you want to use, is that he went away from what got him here. And if you look at what he did at Grand Valley State, if you look at what he did at Central Michigan and Cincinnati, he had explosive, tempo, aggressive offenses. There was a 3-year stretch at Grand Valley State where they won 2 national titles in which their offense scored about 50 points a game. They averaged over 200 yards during that time and about rushing and about 300 yards passing during that stretch. And I believe that if Kurt Ains doesn't get hurt in the playoffs of the year before the 2 titles, I think it'd be 2000. So I think they won in 01 and 02, I think they won in 01 and 02, and then 4 and 5. I think it could be pushed back a year, but the year before they won their first 2 titles, they would have won the title if their starting quarterback doesn't get hurt. He got hurt in the playoffs, and they lost a low-scoring game. And I think the semifinals, the championship game, they would have won 3 titles in a row, and they would have scored a lot of points doing it. And at the time, the GLIAC was a great conference. I mean, Saginaw Valley State was in the playoff every year along with Grand Valley. So to put up the kind of numbers they put up, they weren't doing it against weak competition. And they were explosive, high-powered. At Cincinnati in 2009, I think Cincinnati finished 3rd or 4th in scoring. They were an aggressive, throw the ball down the field, attack defenses type of team, run a lot of plays. He went away from that at Notre Dame. And I think that his reluctance to do the things that we've talked about is more of a Notre Dame thing. He didn't have that reluctance as other places. So I think if you say there's no limitations, meaning, there's no influence from past coaches, there's no influence from boosters, there's no influence whatsoever. What would Brian Kelly want to run? I think Brian Kelly would want to run a more aggressive up-tempo offense, which is why I think ultimately he's going to hire allow Tommy Rees to get to that point. And if he does, I think that that's the thing that's going to allow this team to take that next step. Because for two reasons. Number one, it's going to allow them to be more successful in those big games because they're going to score more points. Number two, if Notre Dame starts scoring 39, 40, 41 points per game, and they start throwing the ball a little bit more effectively, then all of a sudden they become even more attractive to some of those recruits that you're not getting right now, especially the elite quarterbacks that people obsess over. And now all of a sudden you start getting those guys and you take the final step. Brian Denbo says, I was at the Wake Forest game. That would be 2017. Thought they looked different in the second half. Yeah, defensively they looked different in the second half. But remember, late in the second quarter, Brandon had that long touchdown run. And he dove and he got his hand hit and he hurt his hand. He played on it in the second half. They took him out a little bit early. He threw for, I think, like 280 yards, rushed for over 100 yards. It was by far the best game of his career. But he was just never the same after that because, I don't know if it was the hand, if it got in his head. I don't know what the issue is. But, yeah, that was a little bit of a – that team just – as good as they played, they never were the same after that second half against Wake Forest. John Klimek responded to IUP Jess. I think Kelly was innovated and pushed. I think Kelly is now more about ball control and grinding. Okay. Gareth says, hey, Brian, I'm a bit salty that the questions I emailed you didn't get into last week's mailbag. So even though I can't listen while I'm at my desk, I have your show up so I can drop these. I am sorry that you're salty about that, Gareth. I do apologize, but it looks like you got some of those questions in. So he says, I'll listen later to the podcast and look forward to hearing your answers. So here's Garrett's few questions. So let's get into these. First of all, how is your hiatus from Pop going? I hope you're able to stick with it. Good luck. It's been up and down, mostly up. I've had a couple here and there, especially when you go out to dinner, but this has got tea in it. This beautiful Irish Breakdown mug has tea in it. And I put honey in it because honey's good for you if you have it in the right amount. And it gives me a little bit of that caffeine fix. And it keeps me the big reason I like Pop is it's really sweet. I love the sweetness of Pop, especially Mountain Dew, but it's obviously very bad for you. And so trying to find other drinks that can give me some of that sweet taste without being super high in sugar is challenging. And so natural honey and tea is one. I'll drink a glass of grape juice a day. So that way I'm at least getting the benefits of it, but then not having so much that I'm having a ton of sugar. So it's going good so far. I still drink very little Pop. I'm not on a complete zero Pop diet, but I drink very little, and it's helped me lose some weight so far. And I've got a lot more to go. Gareth then asks, Jordan, appreciate the question there, Gareth. I appreciate your concern. Jordan Johnson, from your perspective, would it be better for Notre Dame recruiting if they never signed him, or does the positive of landing a big-time recruit outweigh the negative of losing him? Honestly, Gareth, I don't think it has the impact either way that people think that it did. I think that landing him, he wasn't a real active recruiter, so I don't think having him in the class necessarily benefited getting anyone else. I don't think signing a top recruit is nearly as important as someone performing well. And I think a guy performing well that wasn't a top recruit and going and getting drafted is going to have a similar impact. I get where you and a lot of people are coming from about, the look of this, but I just don't think it has that kind of look. If anything, what you can say to recruits is you can spin this in your favor if you're Notre Dame and say, hey, look, we're going to play the best players. And I don't care if you're a 5-star recruit or a 3-star recruit or whatever. If you're not one of our best players, you're not going to play. And that's something you can sell to these guys. Like, hey, look, man, we got really good players here, and you can come here and if you're good enough to play, you're going to play. And if not, then we'll play you. We won't play you. So I just don't think it's going to hurt. I think one loss like this doesn't hurt Notre Dame. If this becomes a pattern, let's say Lorenzo Styles doesn't pan out, he transfers, or Deion Colsey transfers, then you start getting concerned because it becomes a pattern. But I don't think just losing Jordan Johnson by himself is going to necessarily hurt you. And I think the fact that he went to Central Florida takes away some of the sting as well. It's not like, like Ohio State lost the kid Jamison Williams. They lost him to Alabama. I think that kind of stings a little bit. I think losing him to Central Florida doesn't. If anything, it validates. I don't agree with this. I don't. But I'm looking at it from a recruiting standpoint. I think it validates that maybe Notre Dame was right because he went to a Group of 5 school as opposed to going to a Power 5 school. I don't agree with that, but I think that's how you can spin it if you're Notre Dame and spin it effectively. Gareth asks, QB coaching, is there any chance that Notre Dame hires a Chris Watt type coach to support Tommy in QB development as was done with the O-line a couple years ago? No, I don't think so, and I wouldn't want that. And I get where you're coming from, and it makes a lot of sense because I have a feeling you're looking at this, Gareth, from like comments that I've made about the O-line, which is, and I made this comment with Chip Long at tight end is when you're the offensive coordinator, you got a lot on your plate. Can you also coach the quarterback? Well, I think quarterback is one position where it's even better to have your OC be the quarterback's coach because everything goes through the quarterback. And so as you're installing the offense, you're coaching your quarterback. I don't think Coach Reese needs help coaching quarterbacks also because I'm a big believer that the quarterback should have as few voices as possible in his head. And I don't want an offensive coordinator and a quarterback's coach and the head coach in his ear. And offensive line coaches are always going to have their input for quarterbacks. If possible, I want one voice in the quarterback's head, and that's it. That's never going to be possible with Brian Kelly's head coach, but at least you can limit it to 2. And so I would not necessarily want to see that. All right, Gareth, last couple. If you, I know you were super high on Bradshaw. You have also said that it isn't the end of the world if you miss on any one player, even if it is a big loss. So if Notre Dame doesn't get Bradshaw, then fill in the blank. It is a big loss. And look, it's not the end of the world if you miss one player, but it's a big loss if you don't get Xavier Bradshaw because as we talked about in the wide receiver podcast the other day, there's nobody else on the board like him. If you don't get him, then you're going to get good players. You could get C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather. They're very good football players. Nicholas Anderson's a solid football player, but they're all exactly like what Notre Dame has always had, big, tall, outside guys. Who's that guy that can turn a slant route into a big play? Who's that guy that can take a bubble screen and make a big play out of it? You need those plays to win these games, these big games that Notre Dame isn't winning. And if you don't have a guy like Xavier Bradshaw and you don't get guys like him on a consistent basis, then your offense becomes very limited. You put even more pressure on your quarterback to have to always be right and effective down the field, which is harder and harder in the big games. And you just look, Alabama beat Notre Dame, and their quarterback completed a grand total of 0 passes beyond 20 yards. He only attempted 1 because he was able to effectively get the ball out quickly, which negated Notre Dame's pass rush. Because if you go back and look at that game, Notre Dame was getting pressure on Mac Jones, which is partly why they didn't throw the ball down the field. But they didn't have to because they knew they could attack the perimeter, get the ball out quickly with the run game, get the ball out quickly with the pass game, make people miss, and pick up yards. Notre Dame doesn't really have the ability to do that, or at least they haven't used players like that. And when you get in those games, it can be a lot more difficult if you're constantly having to beat teams down the field with a vertical passing game. All righty. David Jones says, wow, BD, have you ever thought about being an attorney? You just made excellent cases for the Miami loss being the worst in the BK era and for Stanford and USC being among the best wins. I have not. A lot of reasons. Number one, I would never have the grades to get into law school. And I actually worked for my dad. My dad is a process server in Norfolk, in the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area. So I've been around a lot of lawyers in my day. I used to work for him in high school. I used to work for him over the summers when I'd come home when I was in college and work for him over the summers to make some extra money before I had to report back to fall camp. And it was never a job that necessarily interested me at all. I have a great deal of respect for attorneys. It was one of those things where being around that profession was like, yeah, not for me. And you had to wear suits all the time. And I hate wearing suits. And that's one of the things I loved about being a college football coach is I could wear shorts and a t-shirt or warm-up pants to work. And the only time I had to wear a suit was when people came on visits for recruiting. So not going to lie, that's one of the things I liked about being a college football coach. Shane O'Shea says, would Notre Dame have a championship if Urban Meyer chooses Notre Dame over Florida? Yes. Urban Meyer would have won a national championship at Notre Dame. I have no doubt about it, because he would have. See, here's the thing: he would have if they would have hired him, he would have taken that job because Notre Dame made guarantees about changes they were going to make with the program, the facilities, with recruiting, all of that. He would have only taken the job if they made those changes. It wasn't about money. It was about Urban knew, because he had been at Notre Dame and he knew the leadership at Notre Dame, and he knew that they weren't going to support the football team. And that was a factor in why he didn't come, because the program wasn't as supportive as the football team then as they are now, since Jack Swarbrick's been around. And so, look, a head coach is the primary driver of success, but you need support of the institution, financial support, because you have to, look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that Jack Swarbrick was able to raise and account for in regards to building the stadium expansion, the new turf field, the indoor facility, all the changes they've made around Notre Dame. That's not cheap, and that doesn't get covered with your TV contract or money from attendance at games. You got to raise that money, but you're not raising that money if you have this ridiculous idea of, well, we don't need those things. We're not going to get into the arms race and all this other nonsense, which is what the stand was at Notre Dame at the time. And that he would have only taken the job if they were willing to change that. So if they were willing to change that and you hired Urban Meyer, there's no doubt in my mind he would have won a national title. Jay asks, what 5 former Notre Dame players would help Notre Dame win a natty this year? This is a good question. And I'd like to hear everybody's opinions on this. So if I look at the makeup of the current team, if there are 5 players that I could have, I would, number one, so I'm just going to say, okay, so former players, let's just go with people that are let's go with 2000 and on. Okay. So let's not go back to if they could have, Leon Hart. Let's just keep it since 2000 on. No, let's go 1988 and on, because there's one. Okay, Rocket Ismail. I would love to see Rocket Ismail in a modern offense. He's obviously one. Quentin Nelson, getting Quentin Nelson back. Can I get Quentin Nelson and Ronnie Stanley back with Rocket Ismail? That would make me feel really good about where things stand right now. Can I get Harrison Smith back at safety, so I can play Harrison Smith as my strong safety and Kyle Hamilton as my free safety? I feel pretty good about that. And see, one more, I would have to go with Jalen Smith. If I could get Jalen Smith at linebacker, Harrison Smith at safety, Quentin Nelson and Ronnie Stanley on the offensive line, and if I could have Rocket Ismail as my offense, then I don't necessarily need Brady Quinn or Jimmy Clausen, or who are my first thought was Brady Quinn, but I'm like, look, you give me Rocket and Big Q and Ronnie Stanley and Jalen Smith and Harrison Smith on defense. Good luck beating that team. Absolutely good luck beating that team. You're like, we're not going to guard Michael Mayer today because we're still trying to stop Rocket Ismail. Could you imagine Rocket Ismail on RPOs and jet sweeps and stuff that modern offenses do? Oh, goodness. Gareth says, just kidding about being salty, just giving you a hard time. Buddy, you're fine. Trust me. We've corresponded enough. I know you were just giving me a hard time. I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time to get those questions in today, and I hope that when you're sitting back listening to the show that you like those answers and follow up with me if you want more from it, or don't think I answered it the way that you wanted it. Tracy Tip asks, what are the realistic number of catches for the running backs this year? Realistic number? I hope they're at least at 60. Honestly, I think that's a realistic number. If you look at last year, Kyron Williams had 35. Chris Tyree had 8. That's 43. You had Sebo had 2. That's 45. So they had 45 last year in 12 games. This year they're going to play 13 games. I would absolutely expect at least 15 catches to be added. I think that would not be a big issue at all. I think they could certainly do that. John Climax says, I love how we know Mayer's that good, but I see these preseason lists of top tight ends with no mention of Mayer. I've only seen the one from Pro Football Focus, John. I don't know what other ones you've seen, but I thought the one from Pro Football Focus was comical. But I don't get it. But this is something we see all the time. I mean, we see it all the time how people have these lists and there's no Notre Dame players. And then by the end of the year, lo and behold, guess what? Those guys are there. So I don't lose too much sleep over it. I mean, we watch the film. I've talked to enough people that aren't related with Notre Dame, and I've talked to people that are related with Notre Dame. Anyone that's actually watched Notre Dame with any regularity knows that Michael Mayer is an absolute monster. And that's based on what he did, not what we think he can do, just what he's already done. Lauren Hamilton says, which tight end or other player is best fit for fullback? I'd probably go right now. And again, we haven't seen him a whole lot because, he was injured in the blue gold game. But when I'm just thinking about body type, I think the two guys that fit best for me are Kevin Bauman and Kane Barong. I think those are two guys that are tough blockers. They've got a little bit of a shorter build, which to me, you don't want necessarily a 6'5" guy being a fullback because you need to be able to get under pads. And if you're 6'5", 6'6", you got guys getting up underneath your pads. Kevin Bauman and Kane Barong are both listed at like 6'3", 6'4", but they're a little squattier. They both bend well, and I think they'd be a very effective guys from that position. And Lauren also says, could be cool to get some straight up carries from the fullback. Yeah, maybe in some goal line situations. I was surprised we didn't see. I think we saw Tommy Trumbull get like one carry last year. He got a carry last year, I believe, right? Or was it the year before? Yeah, he got a carry last year, carried once for 4 yards. I think if you have like a Tommy Trumbull type, sure. But I think, Lauren, to kind of cheating a little bit, but fitting into what you're talking about, that's why I like the notion of two running backs, because I think Kyron Williams is a tough kid. I could see situations where you're running an outside zone, and we actually saw it a little bit last year on some jet sweeps, where Kyron Williams would get out there and lead block. One of the biggest plays that Notre Dame has had in a bowl game was the CJ Prosise 50-yard run against LSU, if you remember that on the jet sweep. Go back and watch the lead block that Torian Folston had on that play. I think that can be effective. It's not technically a fullback, so I'm a little bit cheating on your question, Lauren, but I think that would be an effective way of using the two backs as well, where it's not just always passing and getting the ball outside, where you have some run aspects to it as well. Technical Technician says, Coach, how impressive is Billy Strauss' physical capabilities? Watching and reading about him, it is obvious how important physical training is to him. From an O-line alignment, his physique is mind-blowing. I haven't really looked at his physique other than when he's in pads, but he is an impressive football player. I mean, he's an interior guy. I don't think he's a tackle. He even plays guard in high school. But his explosiveness off the ball is outstanding. I liked him as a sophomore. I loved him as a junior. And was one of those guys that had a spring football season. He's explosive. He's powerful. His short area quickness is really top notch. He's got fast hands. He's got really good punch. He can play a little out of control a little bit when you project him to the next level, but there is a ton that you can do with him. And he can trap, he can pull. He's a good pass blocker on the inside. Billy Strauss, to me, is a top 100 caliber football player as an interior player. And you got to be pretty dang good to be an interior player and be a top 100 guy. He is really impressive. And if he can make the kind of jump as a senior that he made as a sophomore to junior, and then make that jump from junior to senior, he could be a guy that we're talking about having a similar path that Rocco Spindler had, where he could be competing for early playing time. John Climax 5, to the question earlier from Jay, is Julian Love, Harrison Smith, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, and Chase Claypool. If we had to go like of just Brian Kelly era players to answer the question, my picks would be Will Fuller, no question about it. Quentin Nelson's always going to be on the list. Ronnie Stanley, in my opinion, was a much better offensive lineman than Mike McGlinchey. I think Liam Eichenberg was a better offensive line than Mike McGlinchey. I think Mike McGlinchey was very good, but he wasn't always a very good pass blocker, and I think that's very important. So I'm going Will Fuller, I'm going Quentin Nelson, I'm going Ronnie Stanley, I'm going Jalen Smith, and I'm going Harrison Smith. That's my 5. So if I couldn't use the 1980s guys, that would be my 5. If I had to use just Brian Kelly area players, that would be my 5. Liam Gaming says, if BC has a good year, does Hafley move on to bigger and better things? Possibly, but I think part of that's going to depend on, what he feels he has coming back that next year. I mean, he's recruiting like a guy that anticipates being somewhere for a while. So I like that. But, I think if Jurkovec leaves after this year and goes pro, he's going to lose a lot, and you could maybe see him saying, okay, now's the time to go. But if Dracovic decides to come back in 2022 for a fifth year, I could see him staying and saying, hey, let's ride this thing out. Searcher Green, former Notre Dame commit Parker Boudreaux, is now signed with the WWE. Yeah, that's pretty hilarious. One of my former players, I didn't coach his position. He played D-line for us, but we had a kid that is now in the WWF. When I was at Christopher Newport, his name's Mojo Rowley. That's not his real name, but that's his character name. So it's pretty funny. It's just kind of seeing him. I'm like, and so you see his character, like that's kind of how he was in college too. Really very highly energetic guy with a lot of energy. Brian Denbo, how about some sort of Avery Davis flea flicker? I could see that. I just want to see Avery Davis throwing a football or two this year. John Klimek says, in regards to the play call specific, I'm leaning RPO at Fisher. If it's a pass, and this is back to the earlier question of the first play of the season. So this is what, if you missed that, we were asked, kind of what the first play of the season will be. If it's a pass, will be to the outside with Mayer running up the middle, keeping a safety over the top. I like that. Let's see here. All right. This is an interesting question. I want to read this here real quick. Just your ordinary Joe out there in college football, are there programs which are more competitive by nature of being tied into research expertise within the university at large? Examples: exercise physiology, biomedical engineering, virtual reality simulations, etc. Do you believe there's an opportunity at Notre Dame to leverage untapped expertise along these lines? Well, I do think one thing Notre Dame is doing is tapping more into sort of the business program when it comes to a lot of marketing things. But look, I think there's something to that. I mean, these things have to relate specifically to football, but I mean, I don't know. I can't answer your question. I don't know what other teams do in regards to using certain programs from their schools. It's just not something I've ever asked or did research on. But I would imagine great coaches do those things. I mean, Gatorade started, right, with people at the University of Florida trying to find better ways to hydrate their football team. I mean, that's how Gatorade started. There was, I think, a 30 for 30 or an SEC show about that ESPN did. It was phenomenal. It was really fascinating. But I think it would be smart to do those type of things. I just can't answer your question specifically to that. I would imagine that smart coaches and good programs are taking advantage of the aspects of their school in some ways. And I know Notre Dame is starting to do that a little bit when it comes to some of the marketing stuff that they're doing and allowing, getting kids on that are part of the campus to get experience doing those things with the football program. Michael Morris says, why are we not getting the kids out of Chicago like we used to? That's a very fair question. And part of it is because Notre Dame hasn't been recruiting a lot of the kids from Chicago. Tyler Morris, they missed on him, which I'm okay with. Caleb Brown, they didn't recruit. I mean, they barely recruited him. So you're not going to get him if you don't recruit him. Pete Skoronski was sort of outside Chicago, but they slow played him. They didn't really want him. They got Pat Coogan out of Chicago last year. They've got Justin Walters was kind of a Chicago area kid, I believe. So they've gotten some kids from there, but a lot of them they just for whatever reason haven't recruited. Some of them they couldn't recruit. They weren't going to get into Notre Dame, but we'll see. Liam Gaming, how about a double pass with Mitch Evans? He was a quarterback in high school. When his time comes, that would be something interesting to do, but I don't think that is going to be a first play of the game type of thing. I think that'd be a little too obvious. Tony Stengel, great point on the Miami loss, Brian. I think the other one just hurt more because it was Michigan. Yeah, I think emotionally, from a fan standpoint, the Michigan game hurt because two reasons. Number one, Michigan sucked. That was not a good Michigan team. At least Miami was like a top 10 team. I think they were an overrated top 10 team. They hadn't beaten anybody. But anytime you lose to Michigan, it hurts. And then when you lose to Michigan that bad, and then that Michigan's not on the schedule moving forward, so you can't get payback, that stings. From a fan standpoint, that stings. Absolutely stings. Chief Brody's, why do national media seem to think Notre Dame is bound for a down year? Because it sells. It generates discussion, and Notre Dame fans get mad about it and tune into their shows and click and listen. And what people like that have realized is that angry people still listen and tend to listen more. And I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is because they're still not first of all, a lot of the national media don't really, in my opinion, know football. It's why they're constantly wrong about the teams they hype up. But I look at it and I say, well, I saw one explanation. Well, look what happened when they played Alabama or Clemson. Okay, so don't rank them ahead of Alabama or Clemson. They're killing everybody else. It's like you can put Iowa State above them. Well, look what happened when Notre Dame played Alabama. Well, what would happen if Iowa State had to play Alabama? The fact that they're putting North Carolina ahead of them because they look at all the players Notre Dame lost and they just assume, well, Notre Dame doesn't recruit top 5 classes. They don't have a lot of 5-stars in their roster. They make the same mistake a lot of fans do, which is, well, they lost this player and this player was a high pick and they lost. Oh, there's no way to replace that guy. Well, then they don't realize is that the guys that those guys replaced were really good. And they said they had the same story. So, it's just that constant, people grab onto assumptions about Notre Dame and they still look at this Notre Dame team as like it was 10 years ago, and it's not. So I think part of it is for clicks. Part of it is for show. But part of it is because people mention. I mean, I've asked national media people questions about, hey, I'd like to have you on the show about Notre Dame. And like, yeah, I don't really know a lot about the roster. Like, seriously? Like, you're out there giving opinions every day about Notre Dame, but you don't know a lot about the roster? Maybe you should stop doing that. And so a lot of it is just groupthink. I think there's a lot of groupthink out there. I don't think people study as much as they used to. They don't watch film as much as they used to. And that's why, there's some guys out there that I really like. It's why I've always liked Louis Riddick. I don't watch a lot of NFL, but I feel like if he's given an opinion, at least even when I disagree with it, I feel like it's an educated opinion. And there's some guys like that. It's why I've always liked Jonathan Vilma. I disagree with Jonathan Vilma often, but I feel like my disagreement comes from degrees, not necessarily like, what is this guy talking about? Like, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. There's so many analysts that they'll just say things. You're like, he's talking about a player that hasn't played in 3 weeks. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you clearly don't have a clue what you're doing. Joe says, Just when is it too early to recruit players? I still remember when USC and Lane Kiffin offered Stills while he was in the 8th grade. He never panned out and ended up at West Virginia as a wide receiver. He never panned out as a quarterback, but he was a pretty flipping good wide receiver. So I wouldn't necessarily say that he didn't pan out. He ended up not being a big time recruit. But David Stills was a heck of a college football player. I mean, his last year at West Virginia, he caught 65 passes for 986 yards and 15 touchdowns. In 2017, he caught 60 passes for 980 yards and 18 touchdowns. So I'd say he's pretty darn good football player. He just never panned out as a quarterback. I think 8th grade is way too early. Now, a lot of these schools are offering kids that early. The mistake USC made was that they took the kid's commitment. That was stupid. But, you offer kids early. That's fine. You have to get in the game. Notre Dame's offered a couple freshmen. You have to get yourself in the game now, unfortunately. But you also have to be patient enough to say, look, we can't take this kid this early because you have no idea how he's going to pan out. You just none. Jordan's joined us, just got off some biz calls. Let me read and catch up so I don't repeat any questions. So I assume you're going to have some questions come up. We'll wait for it. So, yeah, John Climax says, Grand Valley won it in 02, 03, 05, and 06. So the 01 team is the one I'm talking about then. That team lost, I think it was the championship. I think they lost to North Dakota State. I'm actually going to have to look that up. But if they had Kurt Ains, they wouldn't have lost. And then Kelly left after 03, went to Central Michigan. He was there from 04 to 06, and then he was at Cincinnati from 07 to 09. And then Chuck Martin was the head coach for the 05 and 06 teams at Grand Valley State that won it. Let's see here. Michael Morris, in big games, do you think it's better to change things up, to throw a team off balance, or just to play your game and try not to make the big mistake? I mean, it depends on the opponent. I mean, there's so many things that go into that. If you feel like you're severely outmanned, then you got to try to mix things up. I think you always have to be innovative from week to week in regards to, you have to be, some calls will work against certain teams because of the way that they play their defense, the way that the personnel matches up. And other weeks you can say, well, we can't just run to the left like we did last week because they're much better on that side, or they overload that side, or they've got 2 great players on that side. So you have to mix it up formationally. You have to mix it up. Maybe the tendency that you have, you run more to the right. This week you're going to run a play more to the boundary, whereas last week you ran it more to the field. There's always types of things like that. And I think you're always looking for ways to create big plays. In some games, you have to change things up even more because the other team is maybe schemed well. Maybe they have really good players. You have to be a little bit more creative to create big plays. But your goal in every game is to be efficient and explosive. And however you have to game plan to be efficient and explosive, and to just kind of play your game and not make a mistake, That's what you do when you are clearly the better team. If when you're playing Navy, play your game and don't make a mistake. When you're playing Alabama, Clemson, you have to be aggressive. You have to think outside the box a little bit. And that doesn't mean you're doing like triple reverse throwback stuff. You don't need to do all that, but you have to be a little bit more creative. Omar Austin, going to the first play of the game. You took my first play guess, so I'll go with tight end post to Mayer. There you go. Allison T asks, is there something specifically about Notre Dame that doesn't appeal to highly ranked 5-star recruits as opposed to Ohio State, Bama, Clemson, etc., or is it all individual player reasons? It's both. I think most of it is individual player reasons. I think the one that can be a little bit more big picture is geography. Like if you're a kid from the South and you're a 5-star player and your goal is to go to the NFL, why would you bypass, if you're from, let's say you're from Miami, why would you bypass Florida, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State to come to South Bend, Indiana? I think that's part of it. I think other parts of it has been there are times when top recruits, and I don't think it's just 5 stars, but top 50 guys, Notre Dame maybe could have got if they would have recruited them better. There's times where Notre Dame, some kids, they want to win a championship. Notre Dame hasn't won a championship since 1988. I mean, some of these kids' parents were kids and babies the last time Notre Dame won a national championship. I mean, think about that. It's been over 30 years. So there's some kids whose parents were very young the last time Notre Dame won a championship. So that's part of it. It's just they don't have that recent tradition, and it's why I think recruiting has improved as Notre Dame has had more success winning football games. So there's not just like one reason to say, oh, it's cold. Well, it's cold in Columbus, and they still get kids from the South. It's because kids don't care about academics. Some don't, some do. I think it's naive to think that every kid cares about academics. And if Notre Dame starts winning championships, then every single kid will want to go to Notre Dame. That's naive and wrong. To say that because a kid is a 5-star, he doesn't care about academics is also wrong and naive. So I think that it's an individual decision for each kid, and a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, with other schools in the last decade have proven to be more successful on the field and more successful when it comes to generating highly drafted players. Some guys want handouts. That guy's going to go to Georgia. He's not going to come to Notre Dame, right? It's always going to happen. And that's been going on since, for decades. That's not new. If Notre Dame starts winning, they'll start getting more players. And it's not a coincidence that their last couple classes have been more highly ranked. And we've seen more of the 5-star players. Michael Mayer was a 5-star player. Kyle Hamilton was a 5-star player. Blake Fisher was a 5-star player, according to Rivals. So they've gotten more of those. Jordan Johnson was a 5-star player. Notre Dame's getting more of those players because they're winning more. And that's kind of how it goes. If Notre Dame goes out this year and makes another college football playoff appearance, you're going to see the recruiting go up even more because kids want to win. They want to play for championships, and they want to be developed to the NFL. And as Notre Dame keeps doing what they've been doing with the NFL draft and keep winning, you're going to see more of those players want to come. And that's the biggest reason why Notre Dame has not had the success recruiting the way that they used to have back in the day. Jordan Schreiber says, obviously Mayer is already a 5-star, but what about the upside of Takis, Bauman, Barong, and Evans? And do you think Reese could utilize 2 tight ends like Belichick once did with Gronk and Hernandez? Certainly possible. They haven't done it in recent years. And that's something that I wrote about recently, Jordan. Maybe it's February, March. I wrote about this where I thought, maybe it's even April. These months all bleed together. I said, look, Notre Dame has to change how they use their tight ends. And some people lost their minds because they didn't actually read the article. They just responded to the headline. And the article basically said, look, the number 1 tight end is being used well. Michael Mayer caught a lot of balls last year. We've seen Notre Dame's number 1 tight end go be effective. But what we saw in 2020 was the number 2 and number 3 tight ends were used very infrequently in the pass game. And that's just from a usage standpoint. A guy can't catch a pass if he's not running a route. I was watching film with a friend the other day, and we watched this play against Georgia where Notre Dame had 3 guys running a route. The tight end and the running back were both pass blocking. Georgia had a 4-man pass rush, and the back and tight end just stood there blocking. Well, okay, you're not going to have a lot of success when there's 7 dudes dropping into coverage and 4 guys, uh, 3 guys in a route. You got to do a better job of utilizing those 2 positions in the pass game and not just your number 1 tight end. And so I think they need to do that. Now, that's also why I'm not as concerned about the receiver situation, because if Notre Dame gets a little thin at receiver and they can't do as much 3 receiver stuff, then to your point, Jordan, they can use more of Takis and Mayer or Bauman and Mayer or Barong and Mayer. And so I just feel like schematically there need to be some changes to make sure that the second tight end is getting used more frequently in the pass game, which eliminates defenses being able to have tendencies for you. So, hey, like last year, Tommy Tremble ran a pass route. I believe it was on like 37% of the snaps he was on the field. Well, that means you've got an over 6 out of 10 chance of saying he ain't running a route. And then when you add in the routes that were short and underneath your sort of your no cover zone, which are crossers and things like that, where you're not going to necessarily cover him, you're going to drop into your zone and just kind of let him get into his zone and then rally to the ball and tackle him for a 3-yard gain. That number goes down into the 20%. And so you got an 8 of 10 chance of that guy's not running more than 5 yards down the field if he even runs a pass route. That allows me as a defensive coordinator to play you more aggressively and to play your run game more aggressively. And so I think those are all things that if they're more effective using their tight ends from just getting them out on routes more, but then also using their tight ends to attack vertically more, you're going to see teams play. Because as we talked about in our podcast, I believe it was yesterday, Michael Mayer, according to Pro Football Focus, had 3 targets all year beyond 20 yards. You got to use them in more ways. Old Grim, good show. Thanks. Thank you, Old Grim. Appreciate it. Jordan getting caught up. He's got some questions in here. Jordan says, because I thought the tight ends all looked fantastic in the passing game during the spring. So that's why you asked that question. Jordan Schreiber says, what type of offense was Reese involved with at the Chargers? Does that give us a clue to a free reign offense he's going to run this year, hopefully? It was more of a pro style. I think it was there used to be the old coach of the Titans. I can't remember his name, but I believe that was their offensive coordinator in 2006. I cannot believe I'm drawing a blank on this. Let me look this up real quick. I'm going to be ticked as soon as I see it. But their offensive coordinator he was the head coach of the Titans a few years back. Let me find it here. Ken Wisenhunt. He was the Titans. Okay. That was their offensive coordinator in 2016. He's more of a pro style guy. I think that's not what most of Tommy's experience has been. I don't think that was a long enough tenure to really say that that's going to have a big influence on what he does schematically. Look, if you really think about it, Tommy's early experiences in college were in Brian Kelly trying to run more of a spread offense that was more pass oriented. So if anything, he's got more of that experience in him than he does anything else. Chief Brody, Stephen Martinez about the questions of players that you'd want. He would want Brady Quinn. Chief Brody says Brady Quinn, Golden Tate, Julian Love, Rocket. That's a good one. You didn't even go with 5. You just felt you were so good with those 4 that you were set. Brian Dembo says Jerome Bettis. Yeah, Jerome would be a beast, absolute beast in the modern game. Could you imagine him like on RPOs? Oh my goodness. Steven says Brady Quinn, Julius Jones, Arnez Battle, Jalen Smith. That's a good list. Let's see. Michael Hughes, my 5. Golson because of mobility. Quentin Nelson, Harrison Smith, Stanley, and Tate. Okay. Mostly Brian Kelly guys. There you go. All right. Here we go. Okay. Let's see here. Jordan asks, what are your thoughts on bringing some of the commitments and recruits onto your show for interviews, especially the ones you love, like Anthony Lucas? Blue and Gold had Stason Raridan on at the same time on a Zoom. I don't really care what Blue and Gold does, to be honest with you. But, we've looked into that. The problem is right now I need to hire people that can cover recruiting first. And so we just brought in Blake Sofa recently. Eric Rudder has kind of been off and on with us, but we're hoping to get him more involved again here soon. But I can't spend all day chasing down these guys. Mike Singer can do that because all Mike does is recruiting, and that's not a knock. It's just obvious. I have a lot of other things going on, and it can be difficult to get those kids scheduled for things. But what I tell you to do, Jordan, is just be patient. We have a lot of fun things scheduled for you this summer, and it's not just about bringing recruits on, but it's also about some other things we have going on. The other part of that, too, is in the past, when we would bring recruits on at BGI – they didn't get a lot of action. And for whatever reason, now maybe that's changed now and we'll do some of those things, but they weren't shows that necessarily generated a lot of interest. But just be patient. We have some fun things planned for you this summer. I just had a phone call yesterday with somebody I'm very excited to hopefully bring on in the show next week, which is going to be a lot of fun and talk offensive line here moving forward. But I got some plans, so just stay tuned. We'll have some fun things for you this summer. Jordan also asked, you had said Notre Dame generally gets their number one target for quarterback. Think they'll get Dante Moore? I don't know. I think they have had a great deal of success getting their top quarterback target. Tyler Buckner was the only guy that they offered in that class. Drew Pine was their top quarterback target. Phil Dracovic was their top quarterback target. I don't want to say Deshaun Kaiser was their top quarterback target, but he was in that top group of guys that they liked. Brandon Wimbush was one of their top quarterback targets. So, I mean, they've had a lot of success getting their top. Gunnar Keel was their top quarterback target. I don't know if they'll get him. I think it's too early for that, Jordan. I mean, he's still just a sophomore. I think Michigan right now is his leader. But what I like about what Coach Reese is doing at quarterback is he's not just putting all his eggs in the Dante Moore basket. And honestly, that's something that maybe we should talk about soon. But one of the things I really like about what this staff is doing with the 22 class, and it's going to carry over in the 23 class, is we're seeing them recruit the board better. And this is an expression I've used in the past, is you've got to recruit your board. And one of the criticisms I had of Lance Taylor recruiting running backs last year, Coach Quinn in 2020 with offensive line, is they didn't recruit the whole board. So when they missed on 2021, with Coach Quinn. But when you miss on your top guys, you don't have that next guy that's already there you've built that relationship with. It was kind of like, well, we haven't been paying attention to that guy because we thought we were going to get, Landon Tangwall. And so we didn't put as much effort into Wyatt Milam. And then now when you miss on Tangwall, you can't go to Wyatt Milam. That was a mistake. They're doing a much better job to the point where I'm seeing all these, they got about 9 receivers crystal balled to Notre Dame right now. Somebody does. Well, they're not signing 9 receivers, so I think they're doing a much better job of recruiting the board to where some of those guys who I don't think are takes right now think that they're takes or think that Notre Dame loves them. And so if they miss on certain players, then they can easily move on to these other guys without that player realizing that he wasn't their top guy. And I think that's a great way to recruit, and I really like that the staff has gotten to that point. All righty. Jordan Schreiber said, I read today on 24/7 that Cardinal Tate said he talks to Reese every day. This is great news. If Notre Dame puts up 40 a game, does Notre Dame lock down a top 5, even top 3 class in 2023? Again, I don't know if that's going to happen from a recruiting ranking standpoint, simply because of the flawed nature of recruiting rankings. From a practical standpoint, Jordan, yes, I think if Notre Dame goes out there and puts up 40 points a game, 2 things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to win a lot of games. And number 2, they're going to look a lot more exciting offensively. And I think that's going to impact them on the recruiting trail. But honestly, the last couple years in 2020 and 2021 wasn't the offensive recruiting that kept Notre Dame from being a top 5 class. I mean, think about some of the talent that Notre Dame has landed the last few years. I mean, just this last year's class alone, you had top 100 quarterback, you had a top 100 wide receiver, or 2 top 100 wide receivers, you had a top 150 tight end, you had a 5-star offensive lineman, you had another a top 100 offensive lineman. The problem was defense. You didn't bring in any top players on defense beyond Colley and Gabriel Rubio. Same thing in 2019. I mean, you had Tosh Baker, top 100 recruit, Jordan Johnson, 5-star, Chris Tyree, top 100 recruit, Drew Payne, top 150 recruit. You had a lot of top recruits. Michael Mayer was a 5-star. They didn't bring as much in on defense. There's actually been the defensive recruiting that's been the difference, but that's changed. When the minute Marcus Freeman was hired, that changed. They got Tyson Ford. They got Aiden Cabrera. He offered, they're not even in the ball game for Junior Tuihalamaka and Jalen Snead if Marcus Freeman's not here. I mean, you guys get that, right? Tuihalamaka didn't even have an offer. He was committed to USC when Marcus Freeman was hired. And Notre Dame pushing for him was one of the reasons that he decommitted. So I think that's been the big thing. All righty. Liam says his top 5 is Michael Floyd, Aaron Taylor, Quentin Nelson, Bobby Taylor. Ooh, good one. And Terry Hanratty. I never saw Terry Hanratty play. D. Beasy says my top 5, Rocket, Tate, Fuller, Quinn, and Smith. Good Lord. That could you imagine an offense that had Rocket, Golden Tate, and Will Fuller at receiver with Brady Quinn at quarterback? That'd be absurd. Oh, that team would be fun to watch. Searcher Green says Brady, Quinn, Quentin Nelson, Rocket, another Rocket, and another Rocket. There was no other Rockets, my friend. There was only one. There can only be one. Michael Morris says Brady Quinn, Rocket, Jerome Bettis, Aaron Taylor, Quentin Nelson. I think the defense is good the way that it is. I like your optimism about the defense. Jordan Schreiber says, are you going to ask Reese about developing players this year instead of when they're needed during one of the interviews? He's been asked about that. And again, he's just going to say, we know the answer to that, right? We know the answer to that. And we'll ask him and he'll give answers. But I mean, what are they going to say? Yeah, we've done a poor job of developing. We're going to try to get better about that. We asked him about that. He talked about, the young receivers that are developing and coming along, and how they want to get those guys going and coach them up and get them ready. They're going to say all the right things. It's just at this point in time, it's not about asking them about it, and us asking about it's not going to get them to change anything. He's got to go out there and he's got to get it done. Jordan says, love the show. Keep up the great work. Thank you. I especially like these set shows so we know when they are every day. And just for people who are new to the show, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every day during the week, 1 o'clock, we have a show. 1 o'clock Eastern, we have a show. Wednesday night, most Wednesday nights, it's going to be at 8. We're also going to have an additional 8 p.m. show that is a recruiting show. So we are trying to have more regular shows, and we really like having the live shows where people can ask questions. Chief Brody says, I was at the Michigan game in the student section, the worst night of my life. Yeah, and it was rainy and cold. Oh, I can imagine if I had to be outside during that. That's pretty terrible. Joseph Wan, I've seen that Notre Dame has already offered a couple of 2024 recruits. Does Notre Dame usually offer kids this early, and what are the pros and cons? I've never seen Notre Dame offer a freshman. I remember how shocking it was the first couple of times they offered like sophomores. And I think Steve Elmer got offered as a sophomore. This is a new trend, and it's just the way that it's going. Recruiting is sped up so much. The pros, there's no cons to it unless you take a commitment. And the con to that is you have no clue how a kid is going to develop. None. Pros are you get involved early and you can start building an early relationship. Get the kid on campus for games, get them to a summer camp, things like that. I mean, I think there's nothing but pros as long as you're not taking too many early commitments. You got to be very careful that you're not taking a ton of early commitments because you may say like they offered a defensive end recently. He's a heck of a player for a freshman. But what if he doesn't get any better? You don't have any idea. What if he gets hurt? What if there's all types of things that could go on? You don't know what kind of academics. You can't tell me that a kid's going to be able to get into Notre Dame's college. The linebacker they offer from Pennsylvania doesn't even have 1 year of high school academics under his belt. There's so much work he has to do in the classroom to even be able to be considered to get into the class. And that's just any freshman because you've only been in high school for a year. But it is good practically to be able to get in there and talk about them. Talk to the kids and start getting those offers and things like that going. John Klimek, any word if you're going to be able to go to attend a practice? None. And I'd be surprised if we're able to. Sean Davis, can you break down why Wisconsin is favored by 4 points against Notre Dame currently? What does Vegas know that we don't? I don't think Vegas knows anything that we don't. They're trying to get action on the game. Look, believe what you want. Notre Dame went 10-2 last year. Wisconsin went 4-3. They look like crap going like 4-3. If I were you, I mean, if I was a betting man, I'm not going to say if I were you because I'm not going to tell you what to do. If I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would take that. I'd be putting my money on Notre Dame. There's no question about it. Richard Robinson, love the channel, brother. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. The key to winning championships to me is QB. Any chance Irish land Manning? I think he would be the guy. Love our recruiting classes getting better each season. I don't think there's any chance that they land Arch Manning, and that's fine. If they get Dante Moore, if they get Ricky Collins, one of those two guys, I'll be just as excited. And honestly, in my opinion, if Arch Manning's name was Arch Johnson and he was not related to a former NFL quarterbacks, I don't think that he would be ranked as high as he is. Now, he'd still be like a top 50 quarterback. Don't get me wrong. He is an outstanding prospect. But I think the people consider him this like generational prospect that's going to lead you to the promised land is because his name is Manning. And I don't mean any disrespect by that to the kid. He's a heck of a player. And if Notre Dame got him, that'd be a heck of a pickup. My point, however, is that I don't think people be ranking him over Dante Moore if his name wasn't Manning. And Ricky Collins, I get him not being ranked as high right now because he's still pretty raw. That kid has tools as good as any quarterback in the class. So This is a loaded 2023 quarterback class. There's already 5 or 6 kids that if Notre Dame lands one of those 5 or 6 kids, I'm thrilled. And Manning is one of them. There's no question, but there are others. And if it's not a Manning or nothing kind of situation. Jeffrey Rohrbacher, Stanley, Nelson, Harrison Smith, Jalen Smith, and Jimmy Clausen. People forget about how accurate Clausen was. Give him some protection, and you don't need great receivers. I've made that argument before. My only concern about Jimmy was he a guy that would inspire teammates, and that's why I always kind of like Brady Quinn a little bit more. But yeah, that you give Jimmy Clausen this offense, he would be absolutely money. John Klimek. Let's see here. First of all, John, appreciate the super chat. Appreciate the support of the channel very, very, very much. As much as we talk about 40 points a game and quarterback, I love how I feel Notre Dame's defense is going to be even better under Marcus, and that's a scary good defense. It absolutely is. I mean, it's kind of fun to be at a point where you kind of almost take them for granted. It's going to be a fun defense to watch this year, but it's also a deep and talented defense. It's part of it is about the coaching, and I think Mike Elson's done a great job defensive line. Clark Lee did a great job. I think Marcus Freeman's going to do a great job. I think Mike Mickens did a great job. I hear a lot of good things about Chris O'Leary. Nick Lazinski's still around as a GA. He's a really good young coach. But look, coaching can only take you so far. You need good, really, really good players, and I think Notre Dame has a lot of really, really good players. Just your ordinary Joe. Strength conditioning is a black box to me. I never hear any details as to what exactly makes strength conditioning substantially different under Matt Bayless. So, number one, even though Notre Dame has a long way to go when it comes to the nutrition program, there's been a greater emphasis on strength and the nutritional aspects of strength conditioning. Some other things, it's more practical strength conditioning program in regards to it's not so much of the old school powerlifting type of things. There is that, but it's geared more towards creating explosiveness. It's geared more towards functionality. It's geared more towards creating a combination of explosiveness and endurance. It's about knowing how far to push players to where they think they've reached their breaking point, but you know that they can go more. There's a lot more science involved in it. There's a lot more technology involved in what Matt Bayless does to where he can track players to kind of, they talk a lot about the GPS stuff. You know, you can find out like what's the breaking point for a player in practice. When do we start to see him decrease? And then how can we then gear things towards making sure that we're pushing those players to where they can then perform at a high level even longer? And so, I mean, those are the things that I think makes it very different. Paul Longo was a more old school guy when it came to a lot of those things than Matt Bayless is. Matt Bayless is one of the old school strength and conditioning coaches that has adopted a lot of the newer school things. And a part of that was why they hired David Ballou initially from IMG, who went to Indiana and now I believe he's at Alabama. And they've carried on a lot of those things because it's something that Matt Bayless knew that they needed. Ethaniel, let's see here. Here we go. A little touchy one. I hated when my teachers, coaches would parrot ESPN calling the Willingham firing racist. I kept telling them that the 2004 recruiting class got him fired, and ESPN was clueless. But again, that kind of goes back to some things that we're talking about earlier. What is the point of ESPN? It's entertainment. It's creating interest. It's getting people to watch. It's why it's not an ESPN show, but it's why they have Skip Bayless on TV. Does anyone actually think Skip Bayless is paid millions and millions and millions of dollars because of his ability to analyze games or his knowledge of sports? No, he's just like most other people when it comes to that kind of stuff. He has this ridiculous personality that people flock to for whatever reason. And that's what it's all about. It's about ratings. They didn't do their homework to find out that, when the number one quarterback in the country was on campus in Notre Dame, the AD had to call Tyrone Willingham and force him to get off the golf course to come spend time with that kid, that they had a GA meet the kid when he was on campus, a story that I heard back in the day, how lazy he was as a recruiter. I heard, because remember, when he was coaching, I had just gotten into coaching. And I remember sitting down with coaches in like Virginia and Maryland, and they're like, Notre Dame is the worst recruiting staff that we encounter. They're always late. They're super arrogant. And they think that they can just walk in here and our kids are supposed to, worship them instead of them making, our kids feel loved. I heard that time and time and time again. But that would then require good journalism, and we don't often see that at ESPN when it comes to those type of things. And B, it would require you to care more about the truth than you care about ratings and you care about money. And I don't think that's ever been ESPN's deal. That's just a fact. Coach D. Beasy. Coach, if Notre Dame maximizes national or name, image, likeness, could that affect get us to a number one recruiting class on itself? I don't think so, because again, there's a lot of flawed nature to the recruiting rankings. Remember, when Notre Dame used to finish with number one classes back in Lou Holtz era, it was a very subjective ranking, kind of like what SI All-American does. SI All-American looks at it and they look at talent, they look at depth, they look at did you meet your needs, is there balance in the class? It's not a points-driven system. And the reason the Notre Dame is going to have a hard time becoming the number one school ranked class, or even top 3 or top 5, and they've had a couple, they had a top 3 class, top 5 class in 2013, is because there's a lot of geographical bias towards certain players. Number one, nowadays there's even more camp bias to those things. And the other part of it is it's just the points based. It's just, here's the number of players you sign, here's the points given. You could not sign a quarterback and you could have a top 5 class if your points fit out. Whereas back in the day, it was more of a, boy, they landed depth, they landed impact players, all these positions, they met needs. How can you have a number 3 ranked class if you didn't meet the needs that you had on your roster? But there's no way to evaluate meeting needs, balance, any of that stuff in a points-driven recruiting system. There just isn't. And yes, Alabama ranks very high, but the thing that's different about Alabama from Florida State or Alabama and USC, other teams that recruit top 5 classes regularly and don't win, is because Alabama actually puts together good classes that have balance and impact players. Whereas Florida State would sign a top 5 class and they'd sign 2 linemen who stunk, but they had tons of running backs and receivers and DBs and linebackers. Even though their class was imbalanced and had holes, it was considered a top 5 class. And that's why I just don't put a lot on those things. I am not bringing on Harry Hiestand to talk O-line. I would love to. And trust me, I would love to do that, but I don't see that happening. Sid Irish, Tyrone Willingham ruined 2 programs, and you're absolutely right. And he did the same thing to Washington that he did to Notre Dame, and even worse. Sid's 5 are Rocket, Rick Meyer, Jerome Bettis, Michael Floyd, and is that Aaron Taylor? I assume that's Aaron Taylor. Tommy Leonard has joined the show a little late, but we're happy to have you, Tommy. I'm sure you're just enjoying how wonderful the state of Virginia is, I'm sure. Chief Brody, expecting a Louisville 2009 type opening against Florida State this year. Defense under new DC might get ripped up early, but eventually team settles down and wins comfortably. Okay, couple things about that. Number one, I don't think the defense is going to get ripped early at all. I don't see that, especially against Florida State. If Mackenzie Milton has time to throw in that game, I'm going to be very concerned about the Notre Dame defense. Number one. Number two, let's not forget that in Louisville in 2019, big reason why Notre Dame allowed that game, not allowed, the reason why that game was close early is because they lost Jafar Armstrong in the opening series. And they had built their entire game plan around Jafar Armstrong. So I get what you're saying. I don't think Mackenzie Milton's the kind of player that's going to give Notre Dame the problems that Jawan Pass did, because I don't see him being the runner that Jawan Pass was. And that was really the big issue that year. And I just think this defense is going to be better than that defense. Sean Rogers is just jumping on. Welcome to the show, Sean, playing catch up on chat. Let's see here. Jeffrey Rohrbacher, I was a 4'11", 120-pound first-day freshman year, graduated at 6'3", 195. That's exactly the point. I mean, and I actually would be a little concerned about guys that are already that mature as freshmen. They say, how much better are they really going to get? Yeah, it's interesting. DBZ asked, realistically, could Williams and Tyree both have over 1,000 yards in total offense? Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't be shocked if it happens. I don't think they're both going to rush for 1,000 yards to which a lot of times people ask, but could they both have 1,000 yards in total offense? Absolutely. I could absolutely see that. So, I think Chris Tyree, it'll be a little bit tougher just because of how much I think they're going to use Kyron Williams, but certainly, I mean, last year, we saw, you use total offense. I think the term we should probably use is all-purpose offense, because total offense is just rushing and passing. So receiving doesn't count in that. But we're talking about like just all-purpose, then yes. I mean, and honestly, if we're talking about all-purpose, they had 2,000, got two guys on 1,000 yards last year, because all-purpose includes return game, and Chris Tyree had over 1,000 yards when you include return game. But if we're just talking receiving and running, absolutely. Kenny Moore says, I think Moore is better than Manning. I agree. And again, look, this is not a knock on Arch Manning. I think Arch Manning is a top 50 recruit. He is a really good recruit. And if Notre Dame got him, I'd be excited. But he's not a top 5 player. It just based on skill. I just don't think that he is. Now, could he be? Sure, he's only a sophomore. But right now, I think Dante Moore's a better prospect. I agree with you completely. I think right now Malachi Nelson's a better prospect. No question. Let's see here. Any more questions? I don't agree with this. No upside with Manning. If he does well, it's expected. If he doesn't work, it's an optics nightmare. I mean, there's upside, because if he works, yeah, it's expected, but you're going to be really freaking good and you could win a national championship with him. So I definitely think there's upside, but I understand the point that if he doesn't pan out, you're going to get crushed for it. You're the only staff that could never develop a Manning. I get that, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Jacob Steely asked, do coaches get bonuses for finishing with top 5 recruiting classes? I thought I heard that in the past, but based on who's ranking. I have said that about Georgia. I've been told that Georgia's coaches get bonuses for finishing the top 5. I don't know that Notre Dame's coaches do. I don't think that they do. And to me, that's ridiculous. Last couple questions here, and we're going to wrap up. And I appreciate everybody for being a part of the show today. I appreciate John for his super chat and supporting the channel. I very, very much appreciate that. Sean Rogers asks, Brian, do you think any of the freshmen will be on campus in June, can crack the 2 deep in that short of time? I would think Collie has the best shot thought. So, John, I am not going to answer your question. And the reason I'm not going to answer your question is because that is the topic of Monday's podcast and Monday's show. So if I answered your question, then I'd have to think of something else to talk about on Monday. So hopefully, Sean, you can wait a couple days to get that answer, because that is something that I want to talk about. And this was an idea that was brought up to me in a private question, and something that I had already planned to talk about and want to talk about was, we saw what the early enrollees can do, and we'll talk a little bit about, what we saw from them. But now there's that batch of, Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, a running back. You're going to get Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas showing up. Joe Alt and Pat Coogan show up. Jason Onye shows up. Prince Collie is going to show up. We're going to see Chance Tucker and JoJo Johnson show up. And we're going to see Kerry G show up. So I definitely think there are some more players that will have an opportunity to crack the 2 deep, and we'll dive into that on Monday. So I appreciate the question. I think it's a great question, but I'd like to save that for Monday so we have more to talk about on Monday. But hopefully, Sean, you can tune in on Monday. It'll be at 1:00 Eastern, and we're going to talk about that on Monday. Jacob, appreciate the super chat, my man. I really, really appreciate it. I always love when you all are able to not just be on the show, but able to support us. It's very, very exciting, and I'm hoping I can have some other good news on Monday's show, but I don't want to promise it just yet because there's still some things I've got to complete. All righty. Jeffrey Rohrbacher, talk about a lot of outside voices with a Manning on the roster. I don't agree with that. I think you're talking about the Manning family, and it may be different, but when Eli and Peyton were in college, Archie was their dad. And that is something that was documented at the time. It's something that's been documented since. He let the coaches coach, and he was their dad, and that was it. And so I don't think that would change. I think Eli and Peyton would allow the kid to go through his experience just like they did. I don't think that would be an issue, if I'm being honest with you. Chief Brody, appreciate you so much for the super chat. I really, really, really appreciate that. Love the show, Coach. And these are literally like my favorite part of the day. I enjoy this so much. I enjoy being able to interact with y'all, answer questions. You all know I love to talk, right? So 2 hours of talking is no problem at all. But it's a lot of fun doing these shows, and I'm excited to see what they're going to be like when we get to the fall. I really can't wait for those, like the pregame and postgame podcasts. We're going to have daily podcasts during the season as well. Those are going to be a lot of fun. Okay, here's all right, DBZ. Or no, we'll go back. John, we missed you up here, John. Here we go. All right. John says Milton is happy to be playing again, but not happy to see his first game is against Notre Dame. I would imagine that is true, especially with the offensive line. Now, their offensive line is going to be a little better this year, but it's not going to be great at all. DBZ asks, Coach, in your honest opinion, if the offense catches up to the defense, can we win it all this year? Yeah, I think so. I do. Because part of it's luck, right? Like last year, Notre Dame's best team, the 2015 team with the right coaches would have had a hard time winning it all last year. That Bama team was just special. This year, I don't think Bama's going to be quite as good. Are they going to be great? Yeah. Are they going to be a playoff contender? Yeah. Are they going to be a title contender? Yeah. Is Clemson going to be a title contender? Yeah. Is Ohio State going to be a title contender? Yeah. But are they going to be as good as as Clemson was in 2018? I don't see it. Is Ohio State going to be as good as they were this past couple seasons? Maybe. I don't think so. Is Alabama going to be quite as good? No. So if Notre Dame's offense becomes the top 10 unit that the defense is, could Notre Dame compete and possibly win a championship this year? Yeah, I believe so. Am I predicting it? Not sure. But that's what I'm looking for. Chief, I'm gonna get back to these questions, but Chief Brody says, can't wait for the post-game show. So we're still thinking about that. So I think what we're gonna do is, because in the past we would have our post-game show would be on Monday. We'd go and review the film. What I'm thinking about doing this year, and we're not sure on it yet, we got to figure out how to make it work practically, is to do a live show sometime after the game and just give like our initial reaction, allow you all to kind of share your opinions, because obviously it'll be part of the live show. And then Monday sort of do may call it something like, after the film room or something, or something about like, okay, we've the emotional passed up part of it is down. We've been able to dive into the film, and then here's what we see. That's kind of what we're thinking about. And at some point in time this summer, we're going to bring that up and see what everybody thinks. But that's what I'm leaning towards now, some sort of immediate post-game show afterwards. And this is the concern. DBZ, can you imagine that chat after a loss? That's kind of my concern. And then this other part is plenty of night games this year. That's another part of the concern. But that's what we're thinking about doing right now. And we'll let you all know how that goes. Let's see here. Michael Morris asks, I think there's so much pressure on the Manning kid, it has to be overwhelming, and then put Notre Dame in the mix. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a legitimate concern, but I think if anyone was capable of handling it, it's going to be a Manning, because that's a very solid family in a lot of ways. So I think the kid will handle it fine. I think the Peyton handled it fine. Eli handled it fine. And I think that Arch will handle it fine. And it's not his dad. He's not living up to his dad's standard either. I think that's a little, I know it's his uncles, but it's different when you're in the same home with, a great player. I think he'll be okay. Yeah, Sean Rogers, I look forward to Monday. Great mind thinking like, okay, appreciate you being cool with me not answering the question, but I really want to get to that. D-Rock with the reminder, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe to our podcast, hit the notification bell so you always get those shows. And if you haven't signed up for it yet, please sign up for our Irish Breakdown newsletter. You'll find it in the text below. We have a link to it. It's free. You get it every day. It has links to all of our top stories. That's another way that you can help support our channel. Let's see here. Joseph Wan, is Sonny Styles visiting with his brother going to be significant in his recruitment? Look, I think Lorenzo Styles Sr. and his wife did a tremendous job of allowing Lorenzo the Jr. to make what he felt was his best decision. And it wasn't go play where your dad went. It wasn't pushing him to Notre Dame. It was, I'm going to help you, guide you to what you need to be looking into. But this is your life. This is your decision. And I think they're going to treat Sonny the same way. And I from what I've seen, they're going to treat Sonny the same way. Sonny is going to do what is best for Sonny, whether that's Ohio State, Notre Dame, or somebody else. Do I think Notre Dame has a great chance with Sonny? Absolutely. But I don't think the family thing will be necessarily the driving force that maybe some people think. I think if Notre Dame gets Sonny Styles, it's going to be because Notre Dame did a great job recruiting Sonny Styles, and he feels he fits into what they do defensively. It's because he has bought into what the institution can do for him in life beyond football. It'll be all those type of things. Could the brother be sort of maybe that final, okay, everything's equal. Okay, I want to play with my brother. Perhaps it could be. But I think ultimately it's going to be the other things that factor into his decision. John says, oh man, it takes me 2 to 3 hours to chill out after a game. Yeah. Now the thing is, they won't be immediately after the game because I'll be at games. Vince and I, or hopefully both of us, will be at games. So we got to finish up our work and get home. So I mean, it's probably going to be at least an hour after the game that we would do it. So you have a little bit of time to chill out. And Jeffrey Warbuck says it used to take me 2-3 hours to chill out after game. Now I just wait to see what Coach D has to say. Thorough analysis always helps me keep my emotions in check. I appreciate that, Jeffrey. I really do. I appreciate that a lot. And that's why with my game observations, I try to keep it about football and not get the emotional response. But, I'm not going to lie. I've driven home away from the stadium really fired up from time to time or really pissed off from time to time. So, yeah, it's I try as best I can to take the fan out of it, but it's hard to – I mean, I was a Notre Dame fan my entire life. It's hard sometimes to not have a little bit of emotion, and that's why I don't want the postgame shows to be immediately after the game. I want to be able to collect my thoughts, get my game observations out, and then put a good show together. So that's what we're looking at right now. So that's what we're going to do right now. So that's it. Old Grim, I usually pound on chairs even when they're winning. Yeah. D-Rock, I used to throw stuff around the house. Okay, I hope your dogs or your children aren't around when that's going on. But I love the emotion and the energy, and I think it's going to make for some really fun shows. And we're going to have to make sure that we're careful about the chats, that some of the chats that we include in post-game shows. But I'm looking forward to it because I love being a part of this community. I appreciate all of y'all that were on the show today. I appreciate everyone that gave that donated to the show at Super Chats. It's very much appreciated. We're going to be off for the next couple days. Wife goes shopping during games. That's smart. That's smart. But appreciate everybody being part of the show today. I hope everybody has a great, safe weekend. I would much rather be doing shows this weekend than all the yard work that I have to do this weekend, but I do need to get to that. We've got some articles. I'm kind of planning and plotting my summer content plan, working on trying to hire some recruiting people. I'm going to probably put a advertisement here. So I got a lot going on, and I need to get caught up this weekend. So we won't have a show this weekend, but we'll be back on Monday with a show. We're going to talk recruiting on Monday. We're going to talk get back to position previews on Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday night, we're going to talk Notre Dame's cornerback board, and then we'll be back on track. Thursday, we'll have I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about on Thursday. We'll figure something out, and then Friday, we'll be back to our mailbag. So if this is your first time listening, Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern, be ready, be locked in, be ready to have a show at Irish Breakdown, a live chat show. And then Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, we'll have one as well. So everybody have a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Check out Irish Breakdown. Like button, please. I beg of you, hit the like button. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to all of y'all very, very soon.